What's going on, guys? My name is Derek Harris here at HP Risk Development. And in today's episode of How to Navigate Amateur Motocross, I get the pleasure of interviewing Coach Robb. So in today's video, I'm going to do my best to ask him questions that hopefully you might be interested in if you've never talked to or had a trainer or a fitness coach. And then we're obviously going to touch on whatever subjects come up and come about. We know that that's not going to be everything that I want to touch on with him, but we hope that over time you get to know him, get to know me, and then more importantly, can glean some information for yourself to be successful at navigating amateur motocross. Be sure to check back for future episodes. We got a lot of neat stuff coming in, and hopefully we're going to have some pretty star-studded lineup of people who have been there and done that, as well as other people in the industry that we would love for you guys to hear from. Let's get to our interview with Coach Robb.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Navigating Amateur Motocross. This is episode number 2. My name is Coach Robb Beams. We've got the man, the myth, and the legend himself, Mr. Derek Harris with HP Development. How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. Good to be on the podcast with you again, Rob.
No, this is great. And for all of you who had reached out on our first episode, we thank you so much for the constant support. We're really looking forward to the future of this podcast. We're probably going to go down places that most people aren't willing to go, and not in a negative way. We're not here to blow anybody out, but we do want to start answering a lot of questions that have been posed to both Derek and I on where do we get started? How do we get from point A to point B? How do we do it effectively? How do we do it in a cost-effective manner? We're going to dive into all that stuff over future shows. So again, thanks for the support. Thanks for coming and watching the second episode. Unfortunately, I'm putting myself in the catbird seat here because last time we were able to get to know a little bit about Derek. And Derek, you and I haven't had a chance to talk much, but I did get quite a bit of feedback on your knowledge and your background. I think people were pleasantly surprised because you're not a very arrogant person. You're not someone that puts yourself out there quite a bit. The feedback I got was, damn, that dude has a lot of knowledge. So props to you. People were really impressed. I thought it was cool.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. Like I said, appreciate people watching, and hopefully not just through this side for me, but hopefully if you think, hey, Derek's pretty knowledgeable, my hope would be that when you go find whoever it is that you need to use for your stuff, you think, that person's pretty knowledgeable too. Mm-hmm. You can kind of say, wow, when they're talking to me, I know they're not giving me some BS, because a lot of times you get to these places and shops and things and they're just spewing BS. So if you feel like I was a little bit knowledgeable, that's great. And hopefully when if you're out there looking for work, you're looking for mods, you're looking for just help, you're looking for another dad at the track who's giving you suspension setup, and they say, something that you're like, I listen to Derek and what you're saying just doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe that little spidey sense goes off and can help you just improve your program, so to speak.
Absolutely. I think that's the most important component, is just breaking through the quagmire of misinformation. I say that on almost every show I go on. And obviously, what I love about our podcast is you're everything on the mechanical side. I'm the one that's trying to help get the throttle jockey strong enough and fit enough and flexible enough and mentally tough enough to handle the bike that you produce. You put those two together, and you can imagine on this side of the fence, every ex-pro is now a physiologist. Every ex-pro is, a nutritionalist or a sports psychologist. And the crazy part about it is I've never advocated that I was on par with a professional rider from a riding coach standpoint. That's not my wheelhouse. But I also know where that wheelhouse, where that sandbox boundaries stop and start. And especially, and this is not a disrespectful term, and I think it's one that is applicable, is trying to break the bro network. On this side of the equation, if somebody says, hey, why are you, or let me rephrase this statement, you should be asking yourself every time you get ready to start a workout, what is the purpose of that workout? How does it fit in when it comes to eliminating my identified weaknesses? How does it contribute? How does this one workout contribute to a week? How does this week contribute to a 6-week block? How does that block contribute to the year of racing? The race schedule that you put out is called periodization. So you can imagine when you're at the track and you hear people saying, oh, you've got to go much softer. And you're thinking it's the exact opposite. Like you educated us in episode 1, what you think is super hard isn't really hard enough because it's actually blowing through the stroke and bottoming out. It's the same thing here when people say, don't warm up, it's a waste of energy. But yet we're the only sport under the sun that doesn't really take a warm up very seriously. When you look at something like Usain Bolt warming up for an hour to race 8 seconds, I thought it was interesting. If you look at Daytona Did you see Tomac? I know you were at the race, but did you get a chance to watch the TV coverage? They were showing Tomac behind the bike doing air squats, and you got Jet back there doing jumping jacks at Arlington or Birmingham, excuse me. And once again, it's like right there, it's showing you what the pros are doing, but we think we're too cool for school. And so I'm with you.
I think you're 100% right too about, and side note, so kind of bring in viewers who may not have watched, this is our podcast about navigating amateur motocross. So if you would like to navigate amateur motocross all the way to the top and become a pro, our hope is that on this podcast, we can give you insights, help, advice, and methodologies and thought processes. I always say that, my dad used to say this when I was young. I didn't get it. I know, like a kid in school, he said, hey, Dad, do you know what the capital of whatever is? Or some stupid trivia question. And he'd be like, I don't remember facts, Derek. I know how to problem solve. Mm-hmm. And of course, he does have a great memory. And of course, to get through school, you have to memorize certain things. But at the end of the day, more important is a thought process. How do I solve a problem? So if I memorize how to solve a problem, I can only do it that way. But if I forget how to memorize it, I can't solve it again. Or as if I figure out the rationale and the problem-solving methodologies to solve a problem, I can always solve that problem.
It's a great,
no matter when I'm presented with it. So kind of like, I think that's what this podcast is about, is the problem is, how do we get to the top of amateur national motocross and then transition that into a professional opportunity? So that's a very challenging proposition. There's only so many people who do it. But at the same time, when you and I have been at this, I'm getting old. So like, I've been at this multiple generations of kids now. Yeah, I have seen everything. I've seen kids make it. I've seen kids who could have made it, not make it. I've seen kids who have just toiled around and never gotten better, but they've chased this for, 15 years. And I've seen kids who have gotten worse, which is exact opposite of what you would hope to do if you're chasing this, right? And then, of course, you see the other side. You see the equipment side, and you see, from our perspective, of course, equipment getting worse, or just guys going around the merry-go-round with shops, or going around the merry-go-round with settings, or things like that. And then on your side, you probably see people who, I see it obviously on our side, the fitness side. I can tell you if a kid's in shape or not, and I'm just a race shop. I don't need to know.
Yep.
But you can probably see where these kids fall into and families, same mistake over and over and over again. And they just refuse to look at it from a outward perspective. Here's what I'm doing. I'm getting the same result. If I were just looking out here, I would say, wow, I just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So why would I expect to have any different result? And that's where, from the fitness side, it's got to be just so frustrating to you. The fitness in and out, it's got to be frustrating to witness that.
It's frustrating because, and I think I may have said this on our first episode, if I take a pen and I drop it in front of you, the law of gravity is going to guarantee that it's going to fall. For me to sit and argue the law of gravity would be a fruitless effort. And that's what when you get into physiology and you get into nutrition and even sports psychology and the way the brain works, I'm not reinventing anything new. What I'm trying to do is put the various concepts in alignment with where the individual is at. And I want to kind of back the train up just a smidge on what you had just said. Have you noticed, I call it the mob mentality, not in a negative way, but more of, well, everybody's doing it this way. We're not quite sure why everybody's doing it this way, but everybody's doing it. So we're just all going to kind of follow each other right off the edge of the cliff. And I obviously, I've been in the sports since 78. I do understand it to a certain extent. And what I mean by that is, if we go back to 1981, the first book I ever read on fitness was when Brad Lackey put out that it was Kawasaki Green book, had him on the cover, had the number plate on the rear fender. It was awesome. And it was Fitness for Motocross. It was literally the only resource I could ever find specific to moto. Then you look at, the idea and the proliferation of Gary Simmons, he came out, and obviously Gary Bailey and those guys came out and started changing the landscape. When you recognize that we don't know what we don't know, is it a real surprise that we're duplicating the same thing, even though it's not working? And nowadays, I'm just forever thankful because right here, we're sitting here doing a show on a digital platform that we can put it out there, that somebody may be watching this 3 years from the day of this recording. The beautiful part is the access to resources are now available. And that's why I was so excited when you brought up this idea of putting this podcast together. How many parents have the desire, not quite sure where to go, have been putting money and time into things, not getting the results, but they don't know where to back the train up to go another direction.
100%, right? Like they need a guidance. And and unfortunately, so this is America, the land of the free, land of capitalism. It's fantastic. But when you're a hammer, you look for nails. And when you're a business, you look for money. And so when you are in our industry and you are trying to sell whatever it is that you are trying to sell, you sell it. And so a lot of these guys just hook, line, and sinker, buy it up. And of course, the results just aren't there. And it's frustrating when you see that. Like you said, to back up, the grass, I think there's psychology to this. I'm not a psychologist, and I haven't studied this at all, but I've watched some podcasts, and I think I saw this mentioned by one psychologist somewhere. He said that it's actually wired into us to look across the fence at what our neighbor's doing. And if our neighbor is more successful than us, to say, well, I should do what they're doing. And you may not really know what they're doing.
That's right.
All you can see is what you can see. So if they're farming and you're like, well, he's out there at 8 a.m. and I'm out there at 7:30, I should probably start at 8 a.m.
Yep.
And he's using this fertilizer and I'm using this other brand, I should use this fertilizer, right? But you may not know the whole picture because you're not him. And unfortunately, you go replicate that and try that. And unfortunately, it may or may not work for you. And so there's something deeply rooted in us to, like you said, mob mentality. It's to look around us, see what's more successful than us, and then try to emulate that. But unfortunately, you just don't know the whole story. And then oftentimes, in motocross specifically, you are not that individual. So what works for them may or may not work for you. Like from the fitness side, it probably would. But a lot of people don't understand because we're so talent-driven in this industry, because the vast majority of amateur races are not fitness-centric compared to pro, you can get by at amateurs with just a lot of talent. And there's kids like, I heard this the other day talking to a guy, Nico Izzy, was just a had to ride all the time type of kid. Maybe didn't work as hard off the bike in the gym, but if he rode a lot, he was fast.
Yeah.
You had an Austin Stroop who could be hurt for 8 months, hop on the bike and be just as fast as Nico. And so, that's got to drive you nuts if you're Nico, right?
Sure.
But you can't do the Stroop program if you're not Stroop. You just don't have that base level of talent and probably, and it's not just talent, right? There's a mentality and this mindset of, hey, I'm willing to send it even though I'm not 100%, right? And I'm not an advocate for that. But you just, that grass is greener on the other side of the fence, and what are they doing? That's wired into us. Yep. But unfortunately, in our industry, the really good knowledge is locked up kind of, behind a key, like what the pros are really doing. They show you, they do the warm-up. But it's not really pervasive throughout amateur motocross. It's just not there. And of course, It's available. You should have tons of content on the internet. If somebody really wanted to get knowledgeable, they could just go put in the hours of watching your content, and they would probably be 100% better off than they are today.
You bring up something that's pretty interesting. I'm adopted into a family of 8. I have 4 older brothers and 4 older sisters. And you know how it is? It's like the brother that's 11 months older than me, Mike, love him to death. He's just that naturally talented guy. I could do something for a year. Take skateboarding, for example. I took up skateboarding as a kid. He was a guy that would show up, and what I took a year to do, he could do it in 3 minutes. I think it's interesting when you look at siblings. Most people would agree with that. There's always that one person in the family, just a natural talent. 99% of the time, they don't do squat with it, right? And we're frustrated because here we are, workaholics, trying to get 1% improvement. They'd kind of half-ass it and go straight to the top. But yet when we apply it to, and for the subject of what we're doing here on this podcast, when you look at the moto side of things, I love what you just said. We're comparing ourselves to the farmer across, not realizing that he just may have that, no pun intended, he might have that green thumb that everything he touches just grows. It's in his DNA. It's like the brother who can show up and just do everything you can do better. No matter how hard you try, he's just more talented. But we don't apply it on this side. We're like, well, if he's wearing blue gloves, I've got to go get blue gloves. And if he's running this or that, especially when we get into the mechanical side, and my goodness, I'm certainly not a mechanic by any stretch of the imagination or an engineer, but I am smart enough to realize there is unusable power. You go and you dump all this money into a tremendously fast motor and it goes to the rear wheel and it's completely useless. And we're going to talk about this in future shows. How do we bridge that? How do you even measure it? How do you gauge it? how would a parent even know, okay, my athlete is fast, but am I putting a motor that matches his or her fast? Because, and again, I'm speaking completely out of my left elbow because I'm not an engineer like you are, but I'm sitting back at 10,000 feet going, just because the person you race against went and bought that motor may not be the best motor for you, especially the way you've educated me on the way that you can configure a motor, how hard it hits down low, how hard it pulls on top, how long does it pull on top, gear ratios, gear settings, and everything else. Do we set the start for a third gear? Do we gear the bike for a third gear start? If so, does the athlete, especially on the super mini below, do they even understand the benefit of a third gear start? Or are we just telling them to click it twice and put it in third and then get mad at them when they don't slip the clutch and it bogs out of the gate? I mean, all these little things. I know, speaking with athletes, I ask, whenever I teach performance camps, I always teach gear inches. And I always say to them, every time you're a gear taller, we talked about this in episode 1, you've mentioned how it softens the rear end, makes the suspension do its job. I'm like, the bike's accelerating, it's pulling the whole time. And then we go to a camp and I'm surprised how many parents aren't even aware of it. Not any fault of their own. I mean, there are families out there that the parents did not grow up racing moto.
Well, that's the monkey see, monkey see, monkey do. Yes. So there's a video floating around right now on Instagram. I only social I do is Instagram for whatever reason. I need to step it up, but there's a video floating around of Barsha back on his Geico days Honda.
Okay.
And back in those days, he was just, this is him like right off rookies and raw and, early in his career. And he still is this way, but he's just on the rev limiter around this track the whole time, just wide open, scrubbing everything you can scrub. And it's really funny because I actually think scrubs have evolved. I hadn't watched these old videos. It's like James started it and really truly had a true scrub.
Yes.
And then you had everybody emulate it, but they hadn't quite figured out the 100% effective scrub. So it looks horrible to me. Like I really hate the video. Like I'm like, oh man, it just looks dumb. But it's like, the funny part being is that now that's what everybody's doing. They emulated Barsha. It was cool. He was cool. And I don't blame him. He was a huge impact in our sport. So it's cool. Kids do it. Now everybody's on the rev limiter all the time. And everybody scrubs a braking bump. And everybody scrubs everything. And it's just changed the landscape of our sport. But what sucks about it to me is that it went the wrong way. It's like if the Lawrences had been the hot topic at that time, and then Verb, that's when Verb exploded. This was the Verb Moto era, which was so cool because it was the first amateur focused media site and that amateurs connected with. And I think that's why Barsha's impact was so big. It was like Verb was able to put it out there in front of amateurs that before you just watched the pros on race, on race day.
Sure.
So, now I really hope the Lawrences influence and impact individuals the other way, because you don't hear them ride that way. And when they scrub, it's effective, but not over the top, right? It's not too much wasted body motion and all these things. They still stay low, but they do it effectively.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's funny watching that video, and it's like that became the new gold standard.
Absolutely.
Why? Because Barsha was fast. But it doesn't necessarily mean it was right. And unfortunately, people just don't grasp that. It's hard to, like you said, if he had just shifted up a few times, he'd probably have gone a couple tenths faster around the racetrack, but
I got a lot of feedback when you had mentioned that, we recognize that Deegan bounces off the rev limiter, and you'd mentioned how they've got the motor configured where he can hold it wide open and it's going to bounce off of it. It's going to come down a little bit, bounce off of it, come down. I did get quite a bit of feedback on that people didn't realize it, because when we're sitting on the sidelines hearing it, all we hear is that well, we don't know what's going on in literally the mechanical realm and underneath those camshaft covers. So it's pretty cool when you had mentioned that. When you
Speaking of, to back up real quick, so we're a little bit off topic, and I've screwed that up.
No, you didn't do anything.
So for the podcast, this episode, we would like to ask you some questions on, get to know Coach Robb. A lot of people already know you. They follow your podcast, the whole work. So I'm going to approach it as if I haven't followed your content. I don't know who you are, and you're basically going to sell me.
Okay.
And then I don't need you to sell me. You sell yourself. But the questions I would have would be the same questions any Joe Blow would have coming into, because I'm a Joe Blow, coming into, hey. So the first question would be, what is your initial background into, I don't know what the right term is, but human performance or fitness? So like, do you have any certifications, degrees? And that doesn't matter to me. We can talk about that in a minute, but
Sure. Well, when I was going from middle school to high school, I was racing motocross and then actually got into BMX when I got into high school, just because I have a big family, as I mentioned. And Dad saw that motocross was a tad bit expensive compared to BMX, buy one BMX bike every 5 years kind of a thing. So my segue into physiology started as an athlete from motocross into BMX. And then I raced BMX through the world championships in '87. And I got 8th in the world in the pro class. And then I went off to college and started getting into the sport of triathlon. One of my roommates was a triathlete. Where the knowledge base comes in is my dad was a very successful businessman. And he's like, look, you're done with racing bicycles. It's time for you to go to school. And so when I went off to school, I had the utmost respect for my dad. He told me what I was going to get my degree. And I know in today's day and age, everyone would have a problem with that. But pretty much what Dad said, you did, especially since he was paying for college. And I was forever thankful for that. Yeah. He's like, look, you're going to go get a degree in computer science and human resource management. You're going to get the business side down. I wanted to be a doctor. And he's like, let's get the business down first, and then we'll see what you want to do on the doctor side. So went to school, got my undergraduate degree in computer science and human resource management. While I was doing that, I'm just fascinated with physiology. I went and got a degree as a licensed massage therapist. So that kind of takes me through, 4 years at college. At that point, I got my degree, and my dad's like, you can go do whatever you want to do. So I went ahead and registered for the graduate program in exercise physiology. And I got married young. I married my high school sweetheart at 22, and we were married for 3 years. And we had some problems with some miscarriages, and we finally, first son comes into the world. And I love my boys. You know what I mean? They're my everything. I just really couldn't justify. At the time, I was actually on the path. I had made it to the Olympic Training Center as an athlete. And part of that process was I was going to go ahead and start going what we refer to as longer distances. Well, I just couldn't justify being in graduate program, doing long bike rides on the weekend when my little guy is growing up. So I tapped out of the graduate program. So I've got 2 years in the program, never got the final degree. And at that point, my dad was like, what's your thoughts on going to medical school? And I'm like, I just don't want to be away from this little guy. At the same time all of this was going on, a buddy of mine who's a professional tennis player asked me if I'd start building fitness programs for him specific for speed and agility. So speed and agility, if you sum it up, is accelerate, decelerate, pivot, reaccelerate. You could apply it to soccer, lacrosse, baseball, what we call any ball and stick sport. It's the same thing. At the same time that I started this coaching business, we had this thing called the fax machine came out. I was happier than a pig covered in slop, right? Because now I could actually fax over to Derek a workout. So I think you can see where this whole direction is going. I have the athletic background. I have the educational background. I got a chance to go to the Olympic Training Center as an athlete, was under some of the best coaches in the world for swimming and cycling and running and nutrition and sports psychology. And then this coaching business was my side hustle. I have a little guy at home. My dad's very, very, when it comes to becoming an entrepreneur, he's always thinking. And so he says, what about this coaching side of things? And he and I kind of wrote a business plan down, and he said, I'll give you, I shouldn't say it that way. I was the married man. It wasn't like my dad was like, you're going to do it my way. But my dad would challenge me like your dad did. And he said, in 1 year, I'd like to see if you can achieve these milestones. And if you can, I think you're on to something. And I was able to do it in a very short period of time. I think it was like 3 months. And I mentioned this on another podcast, but I think we all look for the affirmation from our father. We want that word of you've done good. When I got 8th in the world, my dad said, I'm proud of you. And I don't think there's.
Speaking about that exact comment in our
Yes.
history, if you're a parent,
Yes.
this is something you do need to understand.
Good point.
That if your kid, if you're one of the, like my dad was a driver, do it.
Sure.
Most of and unfortunately, if you're a kid and you want to be successful in this industry, you're going to have a mom or a dad who is a driver. It's just that you have to have somebody drive you to get the best out of yourself, especially when you're young. You just don't know what you're capable of.
Exactly.
So, but as a parent, I'm hard to get compliments from because when you do well, I expected it of you. I believed in you to do that. I've learned that, but it took me years to realize that I'm hard to get compliments from because I thought you did what you're supposed to do. Why did you get a compliment?
That's a great comment. That's a great statement.
So as a parent, you do need to give them out. Your kid is begging for these affirmations of success. So when you're hard on them, great. But when they're successful to maybe your expectation or close to your expectation, don't forget to give out some affirmations to them, some compliments, which is not easy to come by, right? If you're not that type of individual, it's not hard. So anyway, continue on.
Or please don't become a helicopter parent and they buckle their boots the right way and you're doting all over.
Yeah, no, we
can't go that way.
No, exactly right.
Yeah.
But if you are a driver of a parent and you got a pretty successful kid, I see it all the time where there's just no compliments around. And I don't know.
Never good enough. Never good
Yeah,
enough.
exactly. It's never good enough. And that's true. Like, I think AC's relationship was probably that way. I don't know for sure with his dad. That's something we'll talk about down the road. But definitely when they do well, tell them they did well, because it's like a dog, unfortunately, but dogs respond to positive reinforcement and so do humans. If your kid is like, man, I was nice. My dad said, good job. I don't hear that but once a year.
Yeah. Well, and this is where I think it's important to manage expectations. You and I, and we have 2 riders we work with, we go to the track. We don't just go to the track without establishing, what are we here for? What are we going to deem as a successful day at the track? Because if we hit those achievements, if we hit those milestones, everyone's in agreement that that was a good day at the track. If dad has one perception of what a good day is and the rider's not aware of it, you see where there's a huge, I don't want to say a power play, but the rider may have thought, hey, I finally was able to butter those right-hand turns without the use of the rear brake, but it still wasn't good enough for dad. Well, that's because dad had some level of standard that wasn't conveyed to the athlete. So the athlete doesn't realize that he or she didn't meet those expectations. So now there's a huge level of disappointment. You get the quiet treatment, you get the throwing of the tools, you get whatever goes.
Well, and it becomes right. Like, so when nothing's ever good enough, no day at the track is ever good.
That's right. And why are we doing it?
No, we're not doing this for, at the end of the day, it's for fun. And if we're good at it, it can be potentially for money. But at the end of the day, if you lose the fun, the likelihood of the money being there is already low. You might
also don't jeopardize the fact that you're a father-son, a father-daughter, mom-son, mom-daughter.
I've seen this a lot, and I want to get back to your story though.
No, you're good.
I see kids who they've treated this like a job. The parents have, they're full-time at a very young age, and they do it all the way through 18, and they'll never ride a dirt bike when they're 25 ever again in their life.
That's right.
They'll never ride it when they're 30. It's not something that they like anymore.
Yeah. Well, we see that
for any athlete, right?
We see it in college
to ride dirt bikes.
We see it in collegiate sports all the time. You'll see somebody who was an All-American swimmer through high school, college, and you can't get them to go to a pool to save their life. And particularly, I don't know what it is with swimming in particular. This is just my experience on this side of the equation as a coach. I could give you probably 100 people that were All-American swimmers that became alcoholics.
Huh.
And the way that they describe it is they're in the pool 4 to 6 hours a day. They're staring at a black line in the bottom of the pool. The pain level is extremely high. And you do that for 8 or 12 years. Let's say you're fortunate enough and you make it to the Olympics, right? And then the Olympics are done. There's not a professional swimming association. Some of them go into triathlon. But the point being is when they go into the gym, it's smash fest. When they're in the pool, it's a smash fest. 6 days a week, doubles 5 days a week. And it drives them to drink. We had one gentleman who had put on quite a bit of weight. He was an All-American swimmer. He had such a disdain for the gym. For the first 6 months that I worked with him, we literally had him join Planet Fitness. All we did was have him drive and go sit in the lobby because he would get sick to his stomach when he would pull up to a gym, physically sick to his stomach. Now he's 100 pounds overweight.
Yeah.
All we did was have him sit in the lobby and read a book for 30 minutes just to get himself acclimated to being.
And what's neat about that, and this is on your end, so I'm just from my Joe Blow, I'm asking questions here.
Yeah.
Is you did it the right way, which is the psychology needed to be overcome before he would ever do anything physiologically. So
it goes back to your dog analogy. Right.
He needed to have the positive reinforcement of, the gym's really not that bad. He needed to and I don't know how the brain works that way, but reassociate those neurons to a point where, you know what, the gym's a pretty good place. Maybe I should go do something. And that's great.
This gets into some real deep psychological issues, but if you think about, I'm going to bring up a very volatile subject, but it does illustrate the point. If you were in a previously bad relationship, that's your past. Our tendency is to pull our past into the present, screws up the future. And yeah, we could throw cliches, definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, whatever it is. But as you mentioned, the way that the brain is wired is based on our experience, which is what you started the conversation with by saying Stop and think about what you're about to say, the actions that you're about to exude. What kind of impact is that going to have long term? Because then you're pissed off at the young rider that he or she isn't doing what you want, when unfortunately they're a byproduct of the past of which you're responsible for, but you're not taking responsibility of what you did, which dictates how they behave right now.
I have so we'll continue on your story about the coaching thing, but I have noticed, it took me a while to notice this, but humans are just, I think, creatures of habit. And they say that, I mean, it's unbelievably true in ways that are very hard to even understand. So I have multiple clients who kind of have fallen into they're in the habit of going to amateur national races.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the habit of riding motorcycles weekly. They're in the habit of training. They're in the habit of doing this sport, but they haven't had a lot of success the last few years. Success at first to them was like, we've never made Loretta's, let's make Loretta's. Wow, that was a huge success. And you did get better. Okay, great. But after that, it was like, okay, we'd like the top 20, and they never quite really did that.
Mm-hmm.
And they were close, but they kind of got stuck. And now it's like, let's just make it to Loretta's. And what I've noticed is they're in the habit of going through the motions. They're in the habit of the particular, there's a couple of them, but they'll get to Loretta's. You know, like I said, this is one client I'm thinking of, but there's 3 or 4 I'm thinking of too. And all week long, it's the same thing. It's like, this isn't right. That's not good. This is bad moto. At the very end of the week, the best ride that they'll have, and it won't be like spectacular versus like but it'll be a good ride.
Yeah.
And they could have started the week off there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But they're in this habit. They've done this for 5 or 6 years now. They're literally in the habit of, that's what I do. Mm-hmm. And it's so ingrained that person right now, without a huge reset in their program, could never start off Moto 1 good anymore. Mm-hmm. They're not in the habit of doing that. And so, I mean, it's amazing how that works, is that if establishing the right habits in our industry starts the day you're at the racetrack, the day you go to these amateur nationals. How do you approach the race? What are your expectations? How do we improve? Where are we at? And I think, you see it all the time, but like, if the expectations are incorrect, you're coming in with the wrong ones, and dad's unhappy or mom's unhappy, and then it beats down on the kid, and the kid's sitting there stewing and he's unhappy. The week goes backwards.
Absolutely.
And it's like, hey, your job here this week is to get better. Even if we're last, I would like for you to improve our riding and lap times on that racetrack. You're never going to get that type of rough with those type of ruts, because they don't form at training facilities. They don't have that many riders in volume and prep and different skill levels on the same track. When you have different skill levels of wide varieties, the ruts form really weird.
Absolutely.
So you need to go get better all week, no matter where you are. If you're second place, chase it first place. When you're not bridging that lap time gap just a tiny bit through the course of that week, then why are you there?
Mm-hmm.
Right? We should be learning the entire time, not getting in the habit of, I'm going to be a second place guy today and he's a little bit better. And so, because I see that too. And actually, one of your former athletes, if I were an asshole, I can be an asshole. So it's funny, some of you guys think I'm not an asshole. I can be an asshole. And if you know me personally, it's not intentional, but I can be an asshole. If I would ask, like Logan Best, I think he's very talented. You worked with him forever in the past, or I don't know forever, but you worked with him in the past. And I was looking at some results yesterday from Spring Ding Ding Nationals or whatever. And I think he had one good, I think he won a qualifier or something like that, a heat race. But I think I saw some seconds, some thirds, some seconds, back to Freestone, some kind of in that realm where he's kind of been now the last couple of years. And my question to him would be, are you just like in the habit of getting second forever? Like, do you want, I know he wants to win, but it seems like this is where you set yourself up to be, because you had a history of doing this and you haven't figured out in your mind how to break through to be the guy in your mind, because he's getting beat, I think by somebody new, somebody he hasn't really raced before. So that would be the thing that it's like, to me, he's a little bit in the habit of, wow, this is where I kind of fit in, and he needs to change that perception.
And I haven't spoken to the family in a couple of years about the program. I worked with them on 65s up to the 85s. And,
yep.
That year we were at Loretta's, it was Daxton Bennett, it was Deegan, Cochran, and Best. That was your top 4 in that super mini class. The thing that I don't know, and this is, like you say, if you're asking questions, if I could add another question to it, is how many things are you changing in your program, both on and off the bike? Because unfortunately, this industry does a great job of, I don't want to use the word influence as if it goes back to flavor of the month. You've got somebody over here saying, you know what you should do?
Right.
And you know, the words could, would, and should, what those do for you. When you zoom back out and you start doubting everything that you're doing, you mentioned something earlier about, all right, if you're in last place at Loretta's, and this is where we get into what actually constitutes confidence. There's no measuring device in the human body. There's no gauge that you can look at and say, yeah, he's confident today. Oh, she's not so confident today. That's why I always focus on the elapsed time at the track. And I know this is a complete paradigm shift. I can't control what Derek does on the bike. I can't control what he does off the bike. All I can control is myself. But if I'm racing against Derek, and I have my clients do what's called a data dump, if I'm getting beat by Derek every weekend, week in and week out, all I ask my clients to do is sit down with a piece of paper and write down, what is Derek doing better than you? And is there anything that Derek's doing that you can't, like, for example, if Derek's a great sprinter and he gets great starts, last time I checked, you can work on your sprint speed and your starts. Well, Derek really polished. He's very crafty. I hear that a lot. Well, then become a student of the sport. Is study videos, bring your buddy to the track, buy him a hot dog and a beer and say, you know what, take your iPhone and film Derek every second he's on the track. Emulate success.
Emulate success, right? And that's
all it is.
Across the fence, right?
Yes.
It works. It doesn't always work. You don't know their whole program.
You got to figure out what he's doing better than
right. And the pros are doing this, so people don't know this, but and I'll give the Deegans credit on this. He is studying Lawrence's.
Oh yeah.
You see it in his riding. He changed a lot already. Mm-hmm. And so what they do really, really well, he's starting to incorporate in his program now. This year's kind of gone a little sideways for him, and I think that's a mentality issue. Not in a bad way or good way, but
he's 18 years old.
Yeah, he's very young, right?
Yeah.
And it's what I always joke about the pros. It's the pros. These are the big boys. None of those guys want to lose. None of those guys are losers. Mm-hmm. They want to kick your teeth in. And just because you're the presumptive champ this year does not make you the champ this year. There's going to be some guy out there who's looking to knock you off your throne. So
absolutely,
he's learning the hard way that these boys are here to play. Mm-hmm. So, but like in the pros, as an example of this, what do they do better? I love this. Now, I'm the same way. I wasn't naturally talented the way that other riders were, but I could see a guy go do something and be like, oh, wow, that was fast.
Mm-hmm.
How did he do that? Let me go.
How did he do that? There you go.
Right? And then go work it. Oh, wow, I just picked a whole second off my lap in one corner because that dude just was amazing over there.
Yeah.
Or, okay, he tripled into that rhythm section over there that I'm scared to do, and I don't have the natural timing to figure out how to do, but now I've seen somebody do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I know that I need to figure out how to do that. It can be done. He's on the same size motorcycle I'm on. There's no reason I can't do this, and then go figure it out. Now, in the pro level, they have this program called Dartfish, and I'm sure you've heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's in all sports. It's in motorsports. When you're on TV and you see them overlay two sprinters, or if you watch the NFL Combine and they had the 40-yard dash, that's essentially that program. And so you can take two video shots and then it interfaces and meshes and you can see. So all these elite teams have this program to say, man, the rider says, man, I threw down a lap out there and I'm 4/10 off of so-and-so. Let's go look at where you lost time. And they go look at it and they go, wow. He cut down a little early in that corner there, blah, 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 did this, and there was the difference. And you go, yeah, I can do that. Mm-hmm. At that level, it's not so much a skill thing. It's a piecing the entire aspect of the track together, right, for most of those guys. So,
well, look at Daytona. What did Tomac say? He wasn't willing to do that quad that Jet was willing to do. Now, you could get into the argument, well, is he on the back half of his career? He's doing the risk-return payoff. That's fine.
Yep.
But if you're, and we want to make sure we don't take the conversation out of context, nobody is doing something that you can't learn to do. Yes, you could argue that maybe this bike handles a little better than this one. Now we're back to bike setup all over again. This one's a little bit faster. But you still have gear inches, right?
Yep.
We are not running motorcycles in 5th or 6th gear, 100% wide open throttle, and you're getting beat on top end speed. You're really not.
No, you might see that in Baja, right?
Yes, exactly.
And we see that, and we do some work there. But and the funny part is, while that can happen and you get passed by a guy down a long straightaway, it's not what your race is won or lost, thankfully. It's won or lost literally in the whoop sections and everywhere else. So,
well, and that's where you get into the psychological side.
Yeah.
Because you had Tomac early in his career, he wouldn't have thought a nanosecond about following Jet when he quads that, but Tomac said, I just didn't do it.
Yeah.
He recognized
it. And I heard on a pulp, but I totally agree.
Yeah.
He had to ascribe the loss to something. Because I don't think Tomac thought he rode that poorly.
Like
And
Tomac
so,
did not ride poorly at all. That was
right,
the only part of the track that Jet was doing something different. And you
right,
could even go so far as faster and better
right.
than Tomac. And if you do that for 20 laps,
It adds up.
it
Now,
adds up.
I personally think Jet, when I watched, was very good elsewhere.
Mhm.
So, like, the little things he did really well, like
Yeah.
where he's naturally fast. He's just so fast at his carrying his speed through turns.
Yes.
But Tomac had to ascribe something. So ascribing that and being able to identify that that was a weakness is good for him because he can go back and not feel just defeated.
Yep.
And he was not wrong. That section definitely cost him his time. But there is a psychology to the sport. Sorry, I've got noise. You cannot. You have to be honest, and that was honest, right? I just didn't do it. So he'll probably go back and watch the video and question himself and say, could I have done it? Yeah, I know I could do it. Why didn't I do it? And he'll probably, well, it was just mid-race. I wasn't comfortable. It was rutted. I didn't know. Probably in his mind, it wasn't doing the quad. It's what do I do after the quad that I'm not confident in? Because if you really watch, it's super rutted, that section and tough. So that's probably, and then that's the other psychology thing, what we talked about. It goes super deeply rooted. Why don't pros change up their lines in whoops? Why don't pros change up their lines, or anybody? When they find a line, they stick with it. And that goes back to the evil is better than the unknown. And unfortunately, because if you can handle this challenge that you have in front of you, okay, I can handle this kind of mediocre line through the whoops, but I'm getting it every lap. To change and chase your lineup becomes the unknown, and the risk factors go up.
The risk factors go up, and the mental and verbal beatdown goes up as well, because you go 5 laps and it's a little bit slower, but it's predictable and you get through it. Now let's zoom out to 10,000 feet and play devil's advocate. I say this to my clients all the time. You can't have an executive decision that's both brilliant and asinine at the same time.
Right.
And what I mean by that is you hear Dazzy talk about with Jet, manage the risk. Yep, we may have gotten 3rd place, but Dazzy doesn't go back and go, why didn't you go send mode? You got beat because of that. He's like, look, just got to get through here healthy. If, to your point, understand, we call it the familiarity principle. You know what you're familiar with, that repetitive, but as soon as you change the line, and you see this a lot when they put it on the pit board, they tell the riders to change their lines up. As soon as that rider yard darts himself changing his lineup, shouldn't have done it. Dumbest move ever.
Dumbest move you've ever made.
Dumbest move you've ever. Why the hell would you even think about it? But if you do the same one 5 laps in a row and you get beat by 3 seconds, well, if you had just changed your lines, you could have.
It would have been way better.
What the hell is it? What's the athlete supposed to do? He's dark.
Yeah, there's no winning, right? And that's the challenge of racing, which is making those executive decisions, right?
But Dazzy, as a dad, especially with him getting in front of the camera as often as he is, he's giving him a hall pass. Look, I'm yelling at him because what round was it? 1 or 2, and he wrecked 3 times in the last lap, ran into the back of Freezy, right? So his dad probably is like, what were you thinking? And again, to your point, Jet comes in and takes full responsibility. Didn't blame Freezy, shouldn't have been in the way, blah, blah. It's like, I just did a bonehead move. I didn't look far enough up the track. I didn't think about where he was going. Well, to go in and say Jet's an ignorant person and he's dumb and he's stupid, that's really going to fix the problem?
No. And that's, you can't, like, what's that expression? I mean, it's the oldest expression in the book, but can't beat a horse when it's down. And again, as if you're a parent and you're listening to this, when your kid, they probably know when they didn't do something right. So your job is to not build them up fakely, not like you said, false praise.
Yeah.
But you don't need to beat a dead decision over and over and over and over again. If they know it's a bad decision, just ask them, hey, what did you think about that decision? That wasn't a very good decision. Did you learn from it? What did you learn from it? Okay. Well, let's try not to ever do that decision again if we can. And if they associate and identify that, and when they're young, that's tough to do, right? But when they're 8 to 10 years old, they're probably going to start to grasp these concepts. Let's have a positive way of getting better. And I think that's what the Lawrences do really well. It's something, and I'm sure all these families have done really well, but you're watching that growth with Jet, who is still pretty young right now.
Well, there's so many cameras on him, we can't help to not see it.
Right.
And, let's take something like Deegan taking out Cody Schock, right? First and foremost, we're always told don't follow. So then you don't follow, and then somebody goes underneath you. And I've seen this like at mini O's. You remember when Supercross, it was the short right-hand turn or short start, right-hand turn, and then it was a 180 degree back to the left. It was a big S.
Yep.
And the ruts would get deep all the way up to the pegs. Well, let's say that our son, gate drops, he gets a 4th place start, and he follows right behind 1, 2, and 3. And the first place guy stalls, collects everybody. Nobody can get their bikes out of the rut. We're pissed off. I told you not to follow. You followed. He stalled. We went from 4th to 50th, to 14th, 15th. And now our same, because we have a little crystal ball, our athlete goes and he goes around the first turn and he goes out in the marbles. The first 4 guys, they polish the inside rut. And our rider goes out in the marbles and goes from 5th to 4th, or excuse me, goes back 4 places. It was a dumbass move. Why'd you do it? Well, if all 4 guys stalled on the inside, it was the most brilliant move. You're not following. Good job. It's what I told you to do. Before you start barking at your young athlete about what their decision was, stop and put yourself in that game of chess. You told them not to follow. They didn't follow. What could have gone wrong didn't, i.e. they didn't stall. So your rider goes in 5th, comes out 9th. It doesn't mean he made a bad move.
Take it a step deeper. If you're that parent, you should be watching and studying all the starts that day.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Every single moto, somebody's crashed up there. Mm-hmm. So now today, look, here's the deal. Just don't follow. Today, we're just not going to do it. And even if you lose spots, I'm okay with that.
Exactly. That's the verbiage. It's okay if you lose some spots because we're trying to play the bigger game of chess.
Playing the bigger game of chess.
You can't lay it on the ground.
Right.
Can't win.
Right. On the flip side, it's been 1 in 10 starts that somebody's crashed. Okay, if you're up there, just follow.
Yeah,
give up the odds. Have a great start, play the odds. And they don't think that way. Like you said, there's no winning for losing. You can't make the best decision every time.
Yeah.
But we can make a calculated, average, good decision, right?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what we need to do. So you start this training program.
Yes, sir.
And so you start, the internet, power of the internet is essentially through fax. It's not even the internet yet. So you're able to send out some programs.
Yes, sir.
And that starts the ball rolling. And then you hit your dad, get some praise from your dad.
Yeah. The thing that my dad said was in BMX, he said, son, I'm proud of you. And that's all I ever needed to hear. We had the World Championships literally on a Sunday. And my dad and I would always do what we called a decom. We would break down the race, right? Monday morning comes and he literally says, I'm proud of you. You did a great job, but it's time to go to school. Well, I got the affirmation I was looking for, and Dad's like, we're changing chapters. We're moving on. So I go to college, and then I get done with school, and then we build this business plan, and I do it in 3 months instead of a year. And he said, you're on to something. You're going to be good. Like he gave me that affirmation, like what you're doing is going to work. You're going to survive. It will be successful. And that was the only affirmation I needed, because at that point, the biggest division we have 4 verticals of business. We have an endurance division, which is triathletes, runners, cyclists, gravel bikes. We have ball and stick sports. We have a general fitness and weight loss, and we have a motorsports division. Triathlon has always been our biggest and is to this day even. And that whole segment of business just absolutely blew up. So as the internet and the online side of things started to grow, we were actually able to scale a non-scalable business, because it got to a point where I could start to serve 5 or 6 people. I could service a club. Triathlons have triathlete, they have clubs. We work a lot with the Darwin Triathlon group. There's 340 members in there. So you're sitting there speaking to a camera to 340 people. It's great.
A question to interrupt you on that.
No, go for it, bud.
So I have anecdotal evidence. I have, through trial and error, and it's been years now, trained and gotten things that work for me that were huge improvements for things that didn't work for me, right? Mm-hmm. And it took me a while to figure that out. What can you glean from, because fitness is fitness. If you're a really fit individual at bicycling, you're going to be pretty fit at running. You're not 100% developed at it, but you got a strong heart, these things, you're going to be fine. If you're really, really, really fit and you hop on a dirt bike, you're going to be pretty fit on a dirt bike. You may not have the skills and the technique and the things to properly hang on and, be perfect at it. But if you have a high level of fitness, it's there. Mm-hmm. What have you gleaned from triathletes and triathlon training that you never imagined, but that just completely transitions over to moto really, really well?
Ironically, it's the fact that most people think the only way you can go fast is to do speed work. That's probably the biggest misnomer that exists out there. And unfortunately, you see it at facilities left and right. And I'm not naive. I understand you've got to be able to really haul the mail. You've got to have that top end speed. You've got to be able to open up and really create a gap on people. It's no sport is immune to that, except for maybe something like Ironman, where you've got a 7.5 hour, 8 hour race where you can do a lot of jockeying from point A to point B. But stop and think about it. Physiologically, our number one physical limiter will always be the ability to deliver oxygen. Plain and simple. No, it's like the law of gravity. It's the most important. Now you'll have somebody that will be listening to this and they'll go, oh, no. I need to be physically stronger. Well, that's your identified physical weakness. But like if I were to ask you, what is the key component to building raw horsepower? I don't know if it's piston size. I don't know if it's carburetor size, temperature, radiator. I think you would say it's going to be the integration of all of those together, making some minute adjustments collectively with gearing can create horsepower and speed.
That's 100% right. Yeah, it's a system.
And that's the key word. So when I'm working with an athlete, and that's why I enjoyed being at the Olympic Training Center, I was there for triathlon, swim, bike, and run. But what they did was they had physiologists that were specific to swimming, cycling, and running. So you got the best.
Right.
Now take all of those physiological principles, and then you have a bigger general overview of overtraining and undertraining and finding out where's that sweet spot. So if we go and we look at the number one thing that people miss that does come from other sports, number one would be the need for aerobic capacity. Number two, not overtraining, because if you look at us when we go out on the motorcycle, it's one speed. We just wide open all the time. Now, again, I'm not naive. I realize that suspension is designed to be put under load. But what I'm saying is, what about the human being? What's the heart doing? What's the rev limiter inside your heart doing? If every day it's wide open, every day is wide open, every day, we can't be rebuilt the way you can rebuild a mechanical device.
So on that front, so I'm going to, for my anecdotal evidence and like what I've learned. So,
Sure.
So let's say I come to you and I want some training. What I was going to say was it took me years. I didn't chase racing to be a pro when I was really young. We just rode and I was pretty fast. And then, later, but when I was 25-ish, I really wanted to, have fun. I wanted to do 25 plus 25 stuff and be decent.
Yeah.
And I was racing local pro and all that. And I hated getting, I'm competitive. I don't like losing to some 18-year-old kid.
Yep.
So I started working out more and like learning the gym more and all these things. Because I was a multi-sport athlete as a kid. So I luckily, even if they're not the best coaches in the planet, I went to public school. I had quote unquote trainers. You have a coach, you run track, you run basketball. And then there's certain things that each of those segments do that get you pretty fit.
Yep.
And so I was always a pretty fit individual. And then as I got older, I realized was, doing wind sprints endlessly, which is what we did in basketball. You get pretty damn fit doing that. And my mile times improved and stuff. But as you get older, like you said, I can only go wide open so much. And so, when I started adding in those aerobic type workouts when I was older and starting to do more base training, I don't know exactly if that's the right term, but putting in these long, low intensity duration type workouts because you can't do it year round. Right. And then like you said, if you're riding a motorcycle, you already get a lot of high end. And so, and then the other thing, so basically what you're saying is if somebody comes to you, one of the things you learned from triathlons is that, hey, we really do need to build up this basic aerobic engine. We need to build up an aerobic, meaning we need to have like the ability to go do a slow grind for a long time. The stronger, and in my experience on that, is the stronger that becomes, the stronger our top end becomes. So, well, it's true that is, but
no, it's literally, it's like the law of mechanics, right? If I can get the listeners to think about your aerobic capacity is the size of your carburetor, your strength base is going to be the size of your piston. So I can take a KX 500 carburetor and try to stuff it into a KX 65. That piston isn't going to produce more power just because I'm stuffing more air fuel into it. Right. And you can do the reverse of that. If I have a big piston and I have a 65 carb, it isn't going to give the piston what it needs to produce its power. So when you look at the balance of speed is not only about going out and doing speed work.
No, I agree with that entirely. So I was going to say, I'll come back on this topic. So we'll circle back. So then,
okay.
So your background then starts there. So how about if somebody says, okay, well, you don't have some degrees, but this is what you do for a living. What do you do for like continuing education? What do you do to stay current on? And I know that things don't really change, right? Like fitness is fitness, has been fitness forever, and really smart people know what it is for years. Yeah, there's papers on it, but there's little things that evolve. I think recovery and knowledge on recovery has drastically improved in the importance of recovery.
Sure.
I think athletes nowadays would say they probably do less than they did 30 years ago, but it's more targeted, more focused, more proper workout. And then, of course, when you are getting really fit, then maybe that workload can go up if your body's responding correctly. So it's all about, in my opinion, nowadays, I think the difference has been in our technology and that's where, I bought this Garmin watch. So side note to the podcast, guys, I'm going to start up. I'm 7 years removed from doing fitness. I'm going to start up here pretty soon on doing something with Coach Robb, a part of his program. And we're going to hopefully share some of those results. And I'll be as open book as I can possibly be. And I'm excited to not have to think about what I need to do. So that's kind of the big thing. If I was going to get at earlier was it took me till about 30 to really figure out a fitness program that worked for motocross.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just trying stuff and then just be like, oh, that sucks. So for example, arm pump. Well, let me go. Like, for example, I was a small guy forever, like skinny. I was 145 pounds at 22 or something. At 25, I was like, man, I'm going to ride this 450. I'd like to be bigger. I can't be 145. So I got in the gym and I pounded weights, and I'd never been able to put on weight through college. I pounded weights in college. I got pretty strong, but I could just never put on weight. Research diet. And I ate a lot. I had tons of calories. Just never worked. Finally changed my diet up to something. I just started trying stuff, right? Oh, wow. My body responds to a lot higher fat contents than I've been eating for the most part. For whatever reason, now I can start putting on some weight in the gym. Mm-hmm. So I did that. I got up to 162, I think. And I was like, you read those, I don't know how accurate they are, but those like scales with body fat, I was always the 3% individual on those scales, right? Like
Love it.
Now, and I'm like way fat now, but the funny part being that that's just how I was. And so put on that weight, and all of a sudden, I'd never had arm pump realistically. And every once in a while you get it. Oh my God. Talk about the worst arm pump you could ever have in your life, right? So, and that's, if you're a parent and you're watching this, you're like, man, my kid's experiencing arm pump. Mm-hmm. Well, it was one of my questions today is, how do you address that? But I'll tell them, for me, it was like, well, shit, what did I change? Well, I've bulked on all this muscle. I've put on 20 pounds of muscle mass almost. And I did, and in my mind, to tell parents, shit doesn't happen overnight. Yeah. I started this program. I wanted to ride 25. I started at 24. I knew I wanted to ride at 25. So I started doing this at 24 for a year to get ready for 25. Yep. It took a year, and that's a lot of weight to put on in a year. Not quite 20, but most people won't, right? But fuck, I got arm pumps so bad. Like I get one lap into the track and I'm like, I can't move my fingers. I've never had this before. Yeah. Well, I'm lifting 6 to 12 rep stuff, just pounding weights. Dirt bikes isn't 6 to 12 reps. Maybe I need to not do that anymore. So I went to the gym, started doing research online, blah, 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 blah. Maybe I need to go do like till failure 40 rep stuff. And I just completely changed my workout to do that type of stuff in the gym. Mm-hmm. And then I increased my workload, like from 3 to 4 sets to, 5, 6, 7 sets, whatever I could tolerate. And all of a sudden, 2 months later, no arm pump anymore. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's like, and in my mind, it was like, well, I got to train this muscle to do this over and over and over and over again. And then on top of that, I need to train it to go through its threshold. And I think it's lactic threshold is probably what's happening there. I don't know, but it feels similar to when you hit your lactic threshold when you bicycle or whatever. Yeah. Is I need my body to process whatever is making it not be able to do this and continue through that pain. So that's what those high reps would do. Whereas you're like, man, I'm hurting, but I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep going because the weight is super lightweight. Mm-hmm. You have the ability to lift it. It's just commanding your muscles to do another rep. And sure enough, it worked. But I don't think parents think that way. They don't analyze that way. And then on your side of things, I think that's probably obvious, right? Like you're like, yeah. So the question to you would be, if a parent comes to you, back on the certification side. So what do you do for continuing education nowadays to stay current, to learn new things? What have you been doing for the last 15 years on that type of thing?
Yeah, this is where the internet has become advantageous because I don't get into fads and never have, never will, whether it's diet and or exercise. What I do is I only read clinical studies. And I'm very fortunate being an athlete and then becoming a coach at the Olympic Training Center gives me the opportunity to network with people who are only about trying to get the best out of the human body. If you think about this, when I was in college, I was doing everything I could to get accepted into the Olympic training program. I gave up sodas. I didn't eat anything that was white. No white pastas, no white potatoes, no nothing, right? I was as extreme as I could possibly be. Then I go to the Olympic Training Center, and here you are under the tutelage of all these incredible professors who pretty much brought light to the idea that, look, and they would say it politely, please stop arguing with us. And like, for example, you drink Coca-Cola at the end of the day, the phosphorus in the Coca-Cola reactivates the digestive enzymes in your gut. So you ever notice when you're done riding or racing, your appetite's suppressed. The things that will suppress appetite are going to be heat, humidity, stress. Well, when you ride a dirt bike, you pretty much have all three of those for a long period of time.
Well, that's probably why parents struggle with, I can't get my kid to eat on race day.
That's exactly it.
Right. And people, and talk to habits, your kid develops this habit at age 5. You've allowed this habit to continue on until he becomes a pro. Now he's a pro, and I hear pros say, oh man, I just could not eat between motos and the outdoors, and I struggled for it.
Yep.
You're a 22-year-old professional athlete that doesn't know better, but it's not that they don't know better. They develop this habit at age 5.
Well, there's a lot of meat on the bone on what you just said, because there's a lot of complications. Number one, stress, heat, high intensity, high heart rate is going to suppress appetite. At precisely the same time, you need recovery calories in between a moto at a professional level. The other thing is if you eat within a 2-hour window of the start of your race and the foods are too complex, you're going to get loose bowels, or you're going to regurgitate in your helmet. Because when the heart rate goes up, the blood goes to the muscles to deliver oxygen. The water goes to the skin for the exothermic process known as sweating. When you put food in your stomach, water and blood get diverted to the digestive system for digestion. So now you're asking the body to make an executive decision, not die of a heat stroke or digest food. It's always going to purge. It'll purge 100% of the time. So now think about it this way. You invite me out and you say, hey, Rob, we're going to ride 430s today. I'm like, cool. And I show up with a gallon of gas. You're like, are you an idiot?
Yeah, right.
You brought 1 gallon of gas.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet people will go to the racetrack and they say, well, my little Johnny, my little Susie, they don't eat on race day. They can't eat on race day. Well, that if you have it as absolute as mechanical, right? If that athlete were to run out of gas, i.e. stored sugar in the body, and they literally stopped on the track, you would find a way to make the athlete, not make the athlete eat. You'd find a way to learn, like we use smoothies and we use liquid calories. This is one of the things that you see at Ironman, or at any 5K, half marathon, Ironmans, half Ironmans. They're on a liquid diet for the entire race from the beginning to the end.
Because it can be processed.
Because the complexity of the food, as you bring the heart rate up, you have to bring the complexity of the calorie down. That's why the proliferation of sports drinks and energy gels.
Right.
So you continue down this thread of thought where if we're looking at the knowledge that comes over, nutrition would be another one. Nutritional timing would be another one. And again, just for the sake of time and paraphrasing a little bit, when you're looking at the strength training that you're talking about, we have to remember that we ride a motorcycle that is a gyroscope in constant motion.
Mm-hmm.
We have three planes of movement. We have our left and our right side. We have what's going on above and below our belly button. And we have what's going on in the front side of our body and our back side, anterior and posterior side. It's the exact same 3 planes of movement on a motorcycle. Left peg, right peg, above, below the seat, and front and behind the pegs. So you go to the gym, and if you lift in a way that's contrary to a gyroscope in a 3-dimension of movement, you're yin and yanging, and you see where the frustration goes up. The athlete goes to the gym. They're using fixed equipment, which takes balance out of the equation, jumping on something that requires balance and finesse, and they get irritated because they're not getting faster on the dirt bike.
I would ask, hey, Coach Robb. So this is like this is our onboarding interview, and I say, Coach, I've worked out and I've done things, and this is what my personal view is when I was a multi-sport athlete as a kid, it was awesome because I can throw a baseball and play catch. I played that sport. I can run track. I did hurdles and long jump and all that stuff. I played basketball really well, starting point guard type thing, right? So football, great athlete as far as cutting and turning. But to me, those are really important skills because it's balance, coordination, all of these things that we really overlook for the vast majority of motocrossers. Like I go to the track today and I cannot tell you how many kids can throw a baseball and catch it.
Like, or ask them to run through the parking lot.
I'm like, oh my God, like, this guy's an athlete? Are you kidding me? Yes. You know what I mean? And I get it. They haven't done it. I did that since I was really little.
Yeah.
Motocross was an auxiliary sport to us. It wasn't an e-sport to us. So I think that we need this coordination within our sport. So I like the idea of like more balanced, focused things. And I don't know. So Ken Block had some videos years ago of just doing kind of crazy, not crazy, but coordination things, juggling, throwing a ball, balance ball, but for a rally driver, to me, it made a ton of sense. I got to process and I got to do something else. Is it really going to make you way better at just everything? No, but the reality is, it is, in my opinion, keeping neurons and your nervous system, how to learn and how to adapt. And I think that's really critical.
Absolutely.
So how do you work that into an average Joe? Like, let's say, hey, like, for example, I'm years removed from doing anything athletic. I need to just get like some athleticism back, like just some fitness back. But as you age, I'm not going to go run. Well, I could run wind sprints, but I'm not going to go play basketball anymore. My knees, my shoulders, my this, my that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So how do you work that back in as a coach now? And then on top of that, for a kid who maybe hasn't done any other athletic activities and sports in his life, how do you challenge them? How do you challenge them in the gym and from a remote program to do things like this? So how does a parent go about that?
Well, if you start with somebody who's really young, we would refer to a prepubescent child. Just go over and play freeze tag on the playground, because it's stop, pivot, accelerate, stop, pivot, accelerate, and you get that multifunctional movement going. Like you said, you're breaking all three planes of movement. That's essentially what basketball, track and field
all
for you.
Yeah,
you're moving left to right.
And I was always a kid at one freeze tag. It's like kind of, I was little and quick or whatever.
Quick, exactly. But unfortunately, as the old saying goes, if you don't use it, you lose it.
100%.
So for us, when we're working with a parent and they have young athletes, we always want to keep the fun factor in. So for example, we encourage them to go by push. I'm not really big into the Stasics, because all they do is they twist the throttle, and it's just more of moto.
But a push bike.
Yeah, put them on a pedal bike, put them on a pump track with that. Buy them a mountain bike that's got, front and back brakes, just like a motorcycle. Get them on skateboards, get them on pogo sticks, get them on things that we grew up doing naturally. And I love what Brian Deegan said in the Gypsy Tales interview. He said, we don't know if what we did with Deegan was right, but we're about to find out. And if you listen to that interview, he was saying we had him on a BMX bike, a pump track, a BMX track. We were doing backflips into a pit. Everything and anything under the sun. You go and you look at Jet. Jet grew up dancing. As much as we mock him about it, we joke about it, he's making everybody look pretty silly as he's tap dancing.
I agree with it. The Deegans, I'll put it this way, even if he's not a title winner, which I think he has the capability to be, he's still already achieved. He's already at the top level. And he's clearly
so much. And
he's got second place in the outdoors, I think he did, or maybe third, but like he's a podium guy already.
Yep.
That is a success. It may not be a success to them, right? And that's one thing our sport's bad about. We need to value the successes that we have. Like a top 10 national pro is a bad dude, really good. But it clearly has worked in some regards. The kid, I'll put it this way, Deegan does not crash very often.
Right.
And these last ones haven't been hit, I'm not going to say they kind of have been his fault in some ways, but they haven't been a crash.
It could have been anybody.
It wasn't his mistake of an error. That is that quick twitch, quick motion, quick reaction, and of course, technique and form and skill set. The kid's talented. But to me, you're seeing the benefits of that. And if, I think if a kid has a crashing problem, they just constantly, like Chase, for example, and he hasn't crashed this year really, I think one time. So that's good. Everybody's going to crash. But maybe if you're Chase, I don't know what he looks like off the motorcycle playing sports, if he's athletic or not, but maybe that's something that he could adapt to his program and throw in. I'm sure he does do something, you know what I mean? Like they do something, but to me, that's where that multi-sport dynamic type of reactionary stuff comes in that can help your program. You can't always predict what's going to happen. So if they're young, go play.
Yeah. Well, and elaborate, we'll take this too, and we'll bring them together. The key with the youngsters is we're trying to create that multifunctional movement. Literally, functional movement is the key word. That's why I don't want anybody lifting weights on a stationary piece of equipment, because what you're removing from it is balance. So if you take what you just said, the way that you described being able to move through air is called proprioceptive balance. That's the official physiological term. Your ability to float in the air and know where you're at all times. A perfect example is when you almost slip on a pane of ice. How you catch yourself, what's the first thing we do? Our arms go out. It's a counterbalance. You're trying to reestablish balance in a state of being unbalanced, is utilizing proprioceptive skills.
And that's it's involuntary.
Exactly.
It's so fast. Your reaction time's faster than thinking, right?
Yes. But it's trained, even though we don't realize it.
Right.
You take somebody who doesn't get out very often, a lot of these kids sitting on Xbox, they'll fall and bust their ass every time because they literally have no skill.
They haven't done it. Well, speaking of trained, right? The same applies on the dirt bike. And this is one thing that drives me nuts, dabbing your feet through corners.
Mm-hmm.
If you dab your foot through a corner, but you didn't fall, it was completely worthless.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reactionary thing you've done that you've poorly learned and trained yourself to do that risks knee injuries and risks ankle injuries and risks all sorts of things. My thing is just fall over. Like the reality is all the things that you really need to do from that standpoint is drop your head, drop your shoulders, get down inside the bike and hit the gas because you're falling low. If you do all those things and you still fall, there was no saving it. Your foot wasn't going to save you. Right. But if you do all those things and you don't fall, great. And you didn't need to dab your foot, right? But we have to train the body to not be reactionary to do that. And it's so hard to do. And I mean, watch the elite guys. They don't dab their feet.
No.
And
this is where you get into the physiology. Are you dabbing your foot? All right, let's think about this physiologically. I'm bringing my foot up so I don't dab it in a deep rut. That requires quadricep strength, the top of your legs. Well, if the hamstrings are hyper tight, the hamstring is literally creating more load for the quadriceps to even lift that foot up. We're not even taking into consideration the weight of the boot and the velocity of an appendage sticking out. So now put those two together. Is it a dichotomy or is it more of an issue of weak quad? And the quad becomes progressively tired because it's resisting against the hamstring because the hamstring is so tight, or vice versa. You could have a very weak quadricep and a very strong hamstring. And of course, it's going to keep pulling the foot back down. So that's where I always try to work with a riding coach. If a riding coach sees somebody dabbing, don't yell at them to not dab their foot. Most people are not trying to do it intentionally. Ask, why are you dabbing? Right. This is where I go back to bike setup. I know that's your wheelhouse and I don't ever want to overstep my bounds, but if you feel like you're constantly out of balance, is that a bike setup issue? Where's your body position on the bike? You asked earlier about arm pump. I love talking about arm pump. What I think is interesting with arm pump is 90, in my experience, strictly my experience and a lot of anecdotal documentation that we've done, the lion's share of arm pump is going to be related with the human is not in balance on the motorcycle. So if your belly button is behind the pegs, you're hanging on for dear life. That's just simple physiology. Film somebody coming out of a corner. You crack the throttle and your bum goes back and you stand up and you're already behind the bike. Well, you're hanging on for dear life. These muscles on your forearm are much weaker than your quads. But if you get centered over the bike and you have you're squeezing the bike low like you're supposed to, and you crack the throttle, well, the bike should be pulling you from the belly button down. You should never be hanging on from the back of the bike. Now, I'm going to sound like a hypocrite here. When I was working with AC, every single photo you see of him coming out of the gate, where's he at?
Hanging off the back when he was little.
Exactly. Yeah. Because we're trying to get traction because he was so light and Cooper was heavier than us and he was on the 150. Put it in context to your point earlier.
Right. Well, here's an interesting question. So let's go down the arm pump road a little bit. I think a lot of young kids don't fight arm pump. It's kind of the puberty era. They hit puberty and arm pump becomes a thing. And I think there's a physiological change. I think your muscles develop to be more fast twitch and less long duration. I think young kids are more endurance capable. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know about like marathons and stuff, but I think for the 10, 12 minute motos that we have for kids, and then they're really light. And I think your strength to weight ratio when you're little is really high. And I think it's really low as you get bigger, like you just get more mass. And so your hand strength and all that's probably not as strong. But for me, arm pump is, like you said, it's a lot of technique. The proof in the pudding is it's still top pros can get arm pump. It still happens, but they're clearly fit. Tomac, got it at Detroit or whatever. It's comfortability, it's technique. He's plenty fit, right? He probably doesn't fight arm pump on a regular basis. But on the flip side, if you are fighting, I have clients who don't get arm pump when they train and they get arm pump on race day. So you don't need to, give the secrets out. But in my opinion, what is happening there is they're probably not training in the same manner that they race, as far as heart rate, as far as intensity, as far as how they grip the bike. It's how it's hard. And so what I've told multiple people, what I had to learn through that was, number one, if you're not training with a heart rate monitor and know your zones and know what your lactic threshold is and really know those numbers, if you get on the dirt bike and you put your heart rate monitor on and you go past your lactic threshold for a long endurance moto, like a 30, 35 minute moto, and granted, your heart rates vary different disciplines, I guarantee you'll get arm pump. It's just, it's the nature of the beast. So you have to manage that and learning how to ride, even if your technique's good and you're fit, learning how to ride below your thresholds is what allows you to go these long distances. But people don't think like that. And the frustrating part is if they're young, they've been trained, like in America, we train for sprint motos as amateurs.
Mm-hmm.
And then every once a year you do Loretta's. And now Freestone's got a little bit longer motos. The rest of the world, like Europe, trains 20-minute motos on 65s.
Yes. Yep.
Well, our kids have learned how to just sprint, go till you can't. And if you're most of the point on 65s or on 85s, you rip a whole shot, you got good top end speed, you're going to get a gap, you'll still win the moto. The last 2 laps have falling off on your lap time.
Yep.
But then you try to go to that, I'm going to pro now. I got to run at minimum 20s and probably 25s and 35s. You go do that sprint model and 10 minutes in, your heart rate's literally jacked. And now you got arm pump and you're still trying to hang on and you can't do it. So we're training wrong, right? We need to train our athletes for this longer endurance moto. So that's part of it to me, but I derailed that there. So if you're getting arm pump, how much of that can you affect through training in your opinion? Not just on the bike, like fitness wise.
Let's go back to what you just said though. Notice that you said once you go anaerobic.
Right.
What we say was, you said, what's the number one thing that you've brought from the endurance industry over to this side? Aerobic capacity.
Right.
Because if I'm going to pay you $100 to go 60 miles an hour on a motorcycle and you have the choice between a 450 or a 65, everyone's going to choose the 450. Even though it has 2 wheels, it's essentially the same bike. The only difference is the size of the engine. Well, then why did you choose to go with the bigger bike? Because it's easier to go fast. Well,
right.
What's underneath the hood that makes the bikes different? Displacement, carburetor, and pipe. Well, in the human body, that's capillary beds, strength, and aerobic capacity. So to go fast isn't about doing speed work. Going fast is about establishing a strength base complemented with aerobic function and the ability to dissipate lactic acid. You could have a big piston and a big carburetor, and you put a 65 pipe on it, it's backing up.
Yeah.
It can't dissipate the garbage, right? And you can play with all 3 of those. Big carb, small piston isn't going to create new horsepower. And you're not going to get the full power out of the big piston with a small carburetor, and you can just keep mixing all 3.
Right.
I think
so you
most
think
of our
that,
know that.
And I agree with you. Building your aerobic capacity, which is like building a bigger engine essentially, can eliminate a lot of arm pump issues. And I totally agree.
It goes to what you just said. We have quite a few European riders. I work with Josh Gilbert, who rides for the KTM team over in Europe. And if you look, they go and ride Lommel, they'll do 40-minute moto.
Yep.
They're not going out and doing 20s and then racing. They're doing 40-minute motos. And to your point, so are the kids on 65s and 85s. They're doing 30-minute motos.
Well, from an early age, right?
Yes.
We could talk for literally hours on hours and hours because it's so in depth. So,
if you come back to the answer with the arm pump, where I like to approach it, and it's completely unorthodox, there is absolutely 0 reason for you to have a death grip on a motorcycle.
No, and that's another point is technique, right? So these top pros, you see photos all the time at the outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
Their hands are literally loose on the bars. Fingers are loose.
And this is what was interesting when you talked about the weightlifting, because when you're doing 6 or 8 reps, of course you're going to put a heavy grip on there because you don't want to drop it on your throat and kill yourself. And then you go to the lighter weight, and all of a sudden, what do? You
relax your grip.
But people will correlate, well, when I lift weights, I get arm pump. No, the way you lift weights creates physiological.
It's a huge part, right? I actually, so the good thing was I did put on the weight. And then when I went down this training program to research was, what builds strength? Because I think you need to be strong. I really do think that the elite guys have freakish man strength, right? Mm-hmm. Like you give them that 1 rep, hey, what can you lift up off the ground? They're pretty strong for their weight. Their power to weight is very good. Mm-hmm. And they tested that with Ward back in the day and all those motocross athletes, and they were shocked. Like, wow, you can squat how much? And you can do what? They have all this man strength.
Yes.
So what I did at the time was I changed my reps, high reps, did a lot more endurance work, but I also would throw in 1 day a week of, I think it's called, is it hypertrophy or whatever it is? You just go do like a 1 rep mix. You go get warmed up,
1 RM. Yep.
And then you just, as heavy as you can freaking do, maybe obviously you need a spotter, and just try to build some strength and challenge your body physiologically. Because what I realized was at the time was, okay, I'm kind of the weight I want to be. Bodybuilders put on mass. Doesn't mean they're strong. Mm-hmm. And nowadays they've really got that down to a science. Bodybuilders are just doing time under load and all these things that build hypertrophy or whatever. Like they get big muscles, but they may not be as strong as they look. Whereas you have power lifters who are way smaller, but freakishly strong because they train differently. So I just wanted that strength without the bulkiness. So that's what I did. And I would just throw that in. The good news for motocrossers is, you probably don't realize this, is you're doing that on the bike all the time.
Every time you ride it.
You try to save something, or you try to like land a huge G out, your body is really using a lot of strength. I mean, I think I saw the Science of Supercross with Bowers years ago, and they said, oh, wow, we're seeing upwards 10 to 12 Gs on Supercross transitions, like when they're landing.
Yep.
That means you weigh 10 to 12 times your body weight. Mm-hmm. So your hand, your quads, your ankles, your whole body has to withstand that impact for a very short period of time. But that's actually why motocrossers can be very, very briefly strong, because you've been doing this your whole life. So that's just something I threw into the program.
But here's where people will take what you just said out of context, and this is what scares me. The risk of you tearing a muscle off the bone, you do that through tendons. Mm-hmm. When you do those 1RMs, the propensity of that ripping it off is quite high.
Right.
And this is where I got into an argument with a guy at a performance camp that I did once, and you could tell he was roided up. He was a vet rider.
Yeah.
Juiced to the gills. He was big. And I believe, not that I believe, it's physiological fact, having raw power is not as beneficial as having functional power. And he got all offended. He goes, no, you've got to be able to move raw power before you have to move it functionally. And I said, I disagree.
No, I agree with you on that. Yeah.
So when's
the last time you saw a bodybuilder win a Supercross?
Well, here's the thing. To me, I'm not trying to be right. I want to validate the physiology. So I took this guy to a pool, and I had a client that was in the area. He was a 9-year-old swimmer. And I said, okay, how much can you bench press? The 9-year-old could bench press 50 pounds or something. Get in the water. We're going to swim 100 yards down and back in a 50-meter pool. By the time my young swimmer got back to the finish line, the muscle head wasn't even at the other end of the pool on the first lap. So do you see where raw power doesn't create functional movement?
100%, right? It's how do you harness that power, right?
That's it.
And then, and you're right. And I would preface my 1RM with, like, I didn't do like world strongest lifter, gonna pass out type lifts. Like,
but also, where were you getting your information from?
Right. I'm just challenging myself to, okay,
you're Googling and trying stuff.
Yeah. But okay, I can maybe bench 180 6 times. I'd like to try to hit 200. I've never hit 200 before. Okay, I'm already warmed up. I've already done reps at the gym. I'm good to go. Let me go try to hit 200 with the spotter. And I'm not trying to kill myself. Hey, that's too heavy. Let's put it up or whatever. But enough to challenge myself. But you're right. Like, if I just went out there and said, I'm going to give a true max effort all out where I can't, I'm straining in a pass out. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that you are screwed. You're going to get hurt. But you're right. Even on that higher loaded rep, we have a propensity of getting injured there. So how do you balance? So let's just say that you got a pretty good athlete, comes to you. He's 12 years old, 14 years old, 85s, and they're getting their 10th place Loretta's kid, 15th place Loretta's kid, 20th place Loretta's kid. What are your goals? They come to you and they say, okay, I'd like to train with Coach Robb. That's actually the best question I think I have today is, how long does it take for someone to really to see the program work, not in dirt bike results? Like for you, because this is what I always preface parents with. If your kid comes to me untrained, and I'm saying me, like if you come to anybody untrained and I go have you do a month of wind sprints, you're going to see a huge fitness improvement in that 1 month. Mm-hmm. But we're going to peak out, and then that's all we're going to get for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
That's it. And you can only do that so much, and you can't run wind sprints. And this, but you can't run wind sprints all year long. You can't do it. So how long do you need someone on your program, I guess, is the right question to affect a change that's meaningful, useful, practical, to where, hey, I was 15th last year and I was really fading late in the motos. I lost 5 seconds a lap the last 4 laps at Loretta's. Mm-hmm. So next year, I would like to be better than 15th, whether or not that happens or not, but not lose the 4 seconds a lap.
Yeah. Well, you asked 2 questions in one, because when you think about it, if you're on a super mini, it's not like the end of your career is within two years. Mm-hmm. So we're playing the long game. Like, so for example, I always have my athletes on a strength and conditioning program for the next bike. So if you're on an 85, you're on a 125 strength program. If you're on a 125, you're on a 250 strength program. Because it's not if we're going there, it's just a matter of when.
Yeah.
Now, you have a lot of variables to factor in. Have they hit puberty yet? What are their identified weaknesses mentally and physically? What kind of injury history do they have? We do all of these assessments so that we find out exactly where the individual is at And then what we do is we look at the race schedule. I live in Florida. Our biggest elevation change is 11 inches, right? If you're in California, you've got Glen Helen, and you've got a lot of tracks that have a lot of elevation change. The characteristics of the race course dictate the way that you should train. You have to you have to train to the specificity of the race that you're going to be peaking for. If you're looking at a timeline, the most success I've had with athletes are ones that I've had for more than 2 years. So if you look at AC, the first year, you're just trying to gather data. When we go to races, we gather data on the race. Well, when you're going there for the first time, it's just data collection. That's your only job. The second year you go back, you have the data from Daytona, Freestone, Minios, Loretta's, and then you use that information to tweak. Okay, this is what we endured last year. We know at Loretta's, it's hot, it's humid, and it's 6 20-minute motos, 3 per class. We know it's 1 race per day, sometimes 2, depending on how the calendar falls.
I guess to back the question up, right?
Yeah.
When do you need an athlete to affect a change for the next season? So obviously there's a year of data, but like I tell, nobody wants to listen. They always do it backwards. It is what it is. I get it. Yeah, I'm not the expert. You're the expert. But I say like, hey, do you want to do, like if a vet guy, former clients of mine and current clients of mine who become vet riders and still want to chase it, go Loretta's, I'm like, hey, if you're really serious about this, you probably need to start your training program like a month after Loretta's ends for next year.
Yeah, it takes 6 months to build an aerobic engine.
Right.
It takes 6 months to build a base of strength.
Right.
And the body composition that we're sitting with right now on this show together is a byproduct of the food and the exercise from the last 6 months.
So at minimum, right?
Well, that's a fundamental fact.
Right.
You need a 6 month window.
So that's
like
what
you said.
Get wrong is they can't call Coach Robb up and say, hey, it's March. I had a terrible spring nationals. I'd like to be better for Loretta's. And you're going to say, dude, it's too late.
Here's the funny part. It's too late from the standpoint of I don't have the preseason to maximize strength and build an aerobic engine, which we usually take 12 to 16 weeks to do that because we don't rush it. We just let it be a natural build. So that way the tendons and ligaments can grow at the same pace of the muscle and bone density. Then what you want to do is then be able to, but coming back, I could go into periodization for hours, like you said earlier. But if you're looking at, you hire me in June to get ready for Loretta's, all I'm going to clean up is your nutrition, your hydration, your sleep, recovery, and your ability to warm up. Because we're not going to...
before Loretta's, right? These are things I can affect today that will improve.
That's exactly right.
Nominally 10%.
That's it. That's all we can focus on.
I agree with that. So that's the expectation, setting expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where facilities, if you're watching, you're a parent, you're watching this, I see this time and time again, and I actually wanted to bring this up today. I don't want to blow them out of the water because I like them. I think they're great people, and I think the kid's talented, but I'll bring it up in a minute. But if you go to a training facility or go somewhere where they do a lot of sprints, which is what all these places do, you will see an immediate and quick improvement within that. If you haven't been doing that previously, within that short period of time, you're going to be like, oh man, just this 1 month and my kids just made so many strides.
What you focus on grows.
Right. But the problem is you haven't affected the actual changes necessary to really come race day, do what needs to happen. And so what happens is, and you see this time and time again, is you're better at your practice track. You're better at your training facility. Your pace is up a little bit. Your fitness is up a little bit, but your kid's comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
He's not challenged on what the dirt conditions are because he got used to them. He's not challenged on how the bumps form because they form the exact same every single day because it's the same crew of people. He's not challenged on how the ruts form because the ruts form the same way every single day.
Mm-hmm.
The corners and the track are mostly the same, and he knows the jump, and he knows how the ruts are going to be. It's not a problem. Then you go to race day and you go, oh, he sucked today. What's the deal? He's not the same rider he is in training. Well, he is the same rider he is in training. The problem is you hadn't challenged him to the level that this track is. He's not comfortable. The track's not the same dirt. It's not the same track. He only gets a limited amount of track time on it. And his track time is essentially you're sitting in the pits. It's an amateur national. You don't get practice. And if you do get practice at some of these races, it's in the morning, the track's not what you're going to race. I don't even know why people go out. It's a waste of your time, right?
Yep.
And then you probably didn't warm up very well. And if you did, you're sitting on the gate for an hour. You may still be cold, right? That's why you see those guys, Jet, Tomac, still going to the line, doing their stuff. You see Chase before the moto, getting all pumped up. All these guys do that, right? And then you go out there dead cold, essentially, and you sprint yourself to death, and you get on pump in 2 laps, and you're slow, and you tighten up, and you're no good, and you do this over and over and over again. So the quote-unquote immediate success you got by going to that facility and saying, man, I just got so much better in 1 month because all we did was sprints, is not translating to the amateur national. And it's for obvious reasons, all these reasons I laid out. But then you go, but look, he rides so good at the training facility. And I'm like, all these kids ride so good at the training facility. That's why their parents stick behind it. So that was a big question. It's like, if a parent called you and just said, brass tacks, I want, 5 minutes. How long is it going to take me to get my kid to be more fit? So then, so about a year, right? Essentially, we need a year. We need 6 months of aerobic building and all the other things you mentioned.
Yep.
Somehow you're going to have to change your habits on food, on eating, on all these other things, which are really, really tough to change habits. But how long, how much, you're a numbers guy. So in 2 years' time, what kind of percent improvement do you think somebody could see in their aerobic capacity?
We've seen numbers as high as 16% on an aerobic enhancement with 2 years.
2 years.
And it's way beyond the scope of today's conversation.
Right.
We can maybe do it in another one. The reason why it becomes a little bit difficult is just like horsepower. There's a lot of things that can positively and negatively impact horsepower. So people will say, I had a bad weekend of racing, when really, I'm sorry, they'll have a bad weekend of racing and they say that they need to get in shape. And then we find out through a couple formulas, we find out they're actually dehydrated. You mentioned arm pump. You notice no one ever talks about calf pump or back pump. It's always arm pump, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got to reverse engineer every situation, every comment that's brought up. This is why post-race information is invaluable, because when the race is over, it's done, right? It is reality of what it is. What made it a good weekend? What made it a bad weekend? Well, the things that didn't go well, can you control them? If you can, fix them. And if you can't, that's what you need to focus on in training. If you suck on dry, dusty, goat trail type tracks, and that's the way the track developed, well, that's what you got to get good at. That's what the track provided you on race day. You can't complain about what the track develops. You've got to be what the track becomes. It goes back to what you said earlier. Morning is not what you're racing in the afternoon. And this is another thing that to talk about. And we'll save it for another day. But, the idea that we're sitting in pre-staging at Loretta's for 2 hours, 90 minutes minimum. Because if you're not there, you don't get your gate pick, your year's a loss, right?
Yeah.
This is where we get into, unfortunately, promoters are not looking at it from the standpoint of how do we, because they just, how come, I've got so many thoughts on this, Derek, I could.
Yeah, that's the problem. How do we
have
keep it concise, right?
Many
right.
classes.
It's really, really tough to keep it concise. Is my signal bad?
How do you? No, sir.
Okay.
When you look at how many different classes we have, and the whole idea is they oversell the living daylights out of these events, minute moto, and then of course we're running out of sunlight. So then they cut the race down because they say they're running out of sunlight. Well, that's because somebody piss poor management didn't realize, or they didn't put in a margin of error that something could go wrong, someone could get hurt, whatever. Go back to when I was racing. You had an 80 class, we didn't even have 85s, we had 80s. You had a 125 class, you had a 250 class, and you had an open class. That was it. We didn't even get to the races until 9, and you were done by 2. And the race,
it's different, right?
It's stupid. It's absolutely stupid, because now you have kids that, why warm up back in the pit to go sit in the pre-staging area for 90 minutes? So I always tell my athletes, it's not a fitness issue. Save the calories. Just do your warm up when you're underneath the wooding.
Right. And the other part is, be smart. If your family should know this, your dad or mom or mechanic can wait with your bike once you've gotten your gate pick. You have to be there for your pick.
Yep.
Now go do your warm up.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is,
that's why we were saying
helmet on if you're hot at Loretta's and cook yourself. You know how long, you know exactly when your moto's supposed to start. There's no question.
That's right.
So
that's the only good part about
and I love that they do that. I think every race should be ran with a schedule. It's not that complicated. You know how long the lap times are. We should do that. That's something I would change in amateur racing. So go do your warm up as need be. Wear what you need to wear. You could come up there with your boots off. You could come up there with your helmet off and be prepared and whatever. And then as you get within, okay, now we're within the staging time. All right, now I need to put this stuff on and let me get ready. But you're 100% right.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, 1 year of time, you can affect a pretty big change in a rider. As far as fitness, we can see tangible, meaningful results, no problem. But you need 6 months of building, and then probably it's with the race schedule and stuff, you need the next 6 months to in and out of what you can do. What is your opinion?
We try to
come to you and I say, hey, Rob, I love to race, Rob. I love to race. We race at least twice a month.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a fan of that personally, but I think the amateurs are, but we race twice a month. So how do we work this in with travel, with racing? How much do you focus on if he's an 85cc kid do we prioritize our fitness side? And then how can we prioritize our racing and how do we balance that? Because once you're kind of in season, or in doing that, it's kind of hard to do both.
Yeah, it's really not hard to do. What you just have to recognize is you're reverse engineering every single week. Because I'm with you. I think we need to get gate drops. It shouldn't be train at a facility and only race nationals. I'll sit and argue with you all day long about the idea, but we race all week long and it's just an extension. No, I call bullshit.
Not bullshit, 100%.
So the whole idea here is if you say to me, Rob, we're going to race every Sunday, cool. I put that on your calendar.
Yeah.
And for the sake of time that we have here, I know we've got to wrap up.
Yeah.
But the big thing for me is if you give me the races, and we're only talking about pickup races, and I've got you on a 6-week cycle, and you give me those races. Well, what we do is nothing supersedes seat time. Nothing. Everything complements, but nothing supersedes seat time. Nothing whatsoever. So you say to me, Rob, we're going to race every Sunday. Well, what I do is we go get race data. I see how many calories you burnt. We look at things called body battery, HRV, stress score. The same way that you look at a dyno report is the same way we look at the individual. Mm-hmm. We just extrapolate it from a weekend of racing or a day of racing. Let's just say it's a pickup race on Sunday. We just reverse engineer, extrapolate all the data. What we're trying to determine and see is what's the impact of that pickup race on the human body. Once we get enough of that collected data, we say, okay, now Monday through Sunday, I adjust what we do on the bike and off the bike so that you're relatively fresh on Sunday. So you have a productive day on the bike, and we just stack that week over week over week.
So I would say
what you can't do is blow yourself up all week long, go race on the weekend.
Right. You're
going to
be
Monday
worked.
Morning and blow yourself up.
Well, that's another thing I would say, I don't know if fitness wise you would know, but if you're really truly committed to this as a family, you want your kid to do well, you said periodization, which essentially means we pick our battles. When do I want to be good?
Yep.
So if I'd like to race a lot, great, we should do it. But if I'm in my aerobic building phase of the off season, I really need to understand that I may not be 100% at these races yet. I'm just trying to build this base for these next period of time. And I, in Europe, they do this really, really well. I think that, I don't know what the deal is. I think Europe's so far ahead of us in every category in dirt bikes. It's just not even funny. Yeah. And what'll happen is you have these elite pros who come to these off-season races before the GPs, and you might get a surprise winner. You may not, but sometimes you do. And you're like, hey, what the hell? How'd that guy beat Jeffrey Hurlings? How'd that guy beat? And then the GP season comes and he's nowhere near in the same category. Or early in the season, some new guy or some guy has a flash of brilliance and he's really killing it. But come midway through and late into the GP season, the players are the players. They're the best. And what has happened is, in my opinion, I'm not involved in their programs, those guys are still in their building phases early in the season.
Exactly.
And they're peaking when they need to peak. And so they're not overworked, not overtrained, and they're not peaking at the wrong time. Whereas that one guy peaked and he was ready to rock on round one or preseason race. And that's kind of what we saw this year with Cooper Webb at Bercy. Came out, wasn't anywhere sniffing near both Lawrence brothers. Mm-hmm. Granted, it's a one-off race. Who knows if Hunter's having a great day or not. But then come A1, Cooper Webb was a different human being.
That's right.
And clearly that fell right in his off-season window, right? It wasn't where he should be peaked. So I think that that's a lesson to these families, is that the lucky thing for you guys is we don't have a lot of big race schedules. Amateur racing is springtime and Loretta's. And then if you want to do Mini-O's, great. Or you want to do Ponca, great. You can throw it on the schedule. And I think you should for some of them. Yep. But at the end of the day, like, you want to be good at spring nationals, you know when that calendar date is, you probably need to start in like September.
Yep. I've got a client, Luca Medica, and his dad was brilliant. They raced Daytona, flew back home for a week, came back, and now they're at Springading. You know, doing 3 races back to back over 2.5 weeks is just stupid. What do you expect out of your athletes?
About that, I don't. What do you, if you go win Daytona as a B-class kid, did you really get anything?
No. But this goes back to what you just said about, and boy, is this an important one, and we'll close up on this.
Yeah.
This is what was so powerful about Cooper Webb, and our media creates this monster. Cooper Webb had to get the living daylights beat out of him. Oh boy, Cooper's looking shitty on that Yamaha. Don't know if that was a good move. He's in his maximum strength training phase. He's he's been on the bike since June, something we had never seen before. You've never seen somebody change mid-season before.
Yeah.
But what does the media do? Oh, I don't know if that was a smart move. He looked like garbage out there at Bercy. Cooper had to go there going, look, I don't give two shits how I do here. I'm here trying different settings. I'm trying different this. I got paid $150,000 to show up. Screw all you guys. But that's the problem that our parents have, is because you'll have parent number one say to parent number, what? You're not going to Daytona?
Yeah.
What do you mean you're not going to
Gotta go.
You get that bug in their head, right? And now you get the media that says, oh, well, so-and-so was doing really well at Daytona, but man, they really shit the bed when we got to springeting. Well, it's because he's freaking tired for racing 2.5 weeks, but of course we can't factor that in. And then you wonder why we start leaning in on PEDs at an amateur level.
And that's something I meant to talk on today, and I didn't talk on today. So that we'll touch on that later.
Well, we're going to talk about arm pump when you see it in the pro ranks. Ask any physician if you take synthetic medicines, right? HGH, testosterone, stuff like that. It increases the viscosity and the thickness of the tendons. Well, this area doesn't just expand. That's why you see such a proliferation of arm pump issues with the pros. They're on factory equipment.
Yeah.
Why do they have arm pump? They shouldn't have arm pump. Well, that's because this cavity is unfortunately growing collagen that's too thick to stay in the area, so they have to have it addressed. I'm not making it up. I'm not accusing any of them of it. Just ask a physician what would cause this area to feel like it's going to explode. And they'll always tell you synthetic medicines.
Yeah. I think that PEDS it's going to be an interesting topic moving forward. I'm power of the internet, Joe Rogan, all sorts of other sources where now it's out there that every bodybuilder ever in the history of the planet of the earth was on PEDS.
Well, we know
the longest time
cycling as well, right?
Right. And it was a secret. I'm glad that a lot of that comes out. I'm not throwing shade in our industry. I'm not involved in any of that stuff. I don't know on that side, but you look at Tour, even Tour de France today and cycling and whatever, Lance clearly won juiced up to the gills. And yet now they're beating his times, not juiced up. It's not happening. They're doing something.
It's not happening.
No, it's not happening. He was trained to the absolute peak that the human body could be trained to. And he was a freak athlete to begin with on day one, right?
What I love is you get all these talking pundits are like, well, the technology's better wheels, better roll. I'm like, look, guys, I'm not an engineer, but I don't think the rolling resistance being reduced is producing an average rolling speed of an extra 3
you want to
miles
laugh about that. Let's talk basic physics, right? So I rode every vintage bike you could ever ride. I rode every Honda you could ride, Elsinore, from day one to current. And I had a client who in my area actually has all these bikes. They're all so cool.
Yeah.
And so I rode from like the first. I'm not a vintage guy, so the 70 whatever Elsinores, and then every generational change, whenever they made a big change, he has it, and he has works versions of them, not just kind of.
Wow.
Amazing bikes, and he doesn't really let them get ridden, but kind of they are ridden.
Yeah.
So I got to do that one day, and mind blown. Like the early ones were total shit compared to today. No suspension is really the problem, and the brakes suck, but they were slow, so you didn't have to worry about the brakes. But like you'd hit you'd go over a little tiny braking bump that you did not know existed on a modern bike. You didn't even know it was on the track, and blow your hands off the bars on one of these vintage bikes, and you're like, where was that bump at? I didn't even see that thing. So that was interesting. And modern tracks are not made for these bikes, right?
Yeah.
And then I got to like his 80s era, like his early 80s bikes, which were work. So they're like long travel, dual shock, really good motors for the time. And they're actually pretty fast.
Yeah.
Shockingly fast. Mm-hmm. Not that far off. They're not a modern 125, but not that far off, closer than they are far away. The problem was they have no brakes. And so that's the issue. You can't stop the damn thing. And then the suspension is long travel, but it's very soft back then compared to today. But if it was a motocross track with no jumps, great. But my takeaway was, once I got to his 90, he had a full works 1991 or 2 Eric Kehoe bike. Don't know how he got it.
Wow.
Don't ask me how he got it. I don't know how he got it, but full works. And I'm talking literally had forks on it that were production in basically 08 on Hondas. Okay. So in 92, because we serviced them, rebuilt them, did the forks, did the motors. We had done all that work for him at the time, met him.
Yeah.
So really cool guy named Chris. And so I rode that bike, and I had a YZ125 there that day, a modern, like brand new. I couldn't tell the difference between those two bikes. 1992, bone stock, whatever. But my takeaway was, you know what? They all got 2 wheels. And they got some, once we got to some suspension, you ain't reinventing the dirt bike. The progress we made from 92 till like '06 is there.
Yes.
But it's like, 10% maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're at the very end of the curve. I'm not convinced that a modern 450 is, I think you could go win on a 2015 KX 450 tomorrow. Like I really, with modern, you could totally do that. I don't think they still got 2 tires. They still got a frame that looks about the same. You know what I mean? Suspension travel hasn't evolved. Suspension really hasn't evolved as far as internals that much. We kind of got stuck with where we're at.
Yeah.
So on a bicycle, on that argument, it's like, oh, they're more efficient. When you start, my dad's into cycling. I got into road biking when I was 30 to get into fitness. And it's like, oh man, these wheels are worth, 5 seconds over 60 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Okay, that's a lot. I'm looking for 5 seconds, but it's not a lot. But the thing is, when you look at the mountain stages and you go, okay, this is literally a horsepower equation. How much do you weigh? How much does your bike weigh? You're going so slow that the rolling resistance drag is speed dependent. So it's not that important. Airspeed drag, not that important because you're going up a mountain.
Yep.
So what we're talking about is pure 100% unadulterated watts.
Yep. That's
exactly. Now they're averaging more watts than they've ever averaged before. And so
that's
all natural though, right? These riders are 100% natural.
Well, it's all these new, revelations in training. And I'm like, there's nothing new under the sun, guys, just like engineering. I mean,
I bet Lance did what they're doing. He just didn't do it as well.
I remember when they asked Greg LeMond, do you think that what Lance is doing, I forgot what the exact question was. Essentially paraphrasing it, they called up Greg LeMond and said, hey, what do you think about what Lance is doing? And he says, well, if it's being done cleanly, it's amazing. And that's all he said, because Greg is very adamant that he never took drugs. And you look at the average speed, the rolling speed, and yes, the bikes are different, the composites are different, wheels are different, but not to the extent. And I'll leave you with this thought, and we can actually bring it up on our next show. When you stop and you think about anyone who's listening to this, if you go out and you try to do what any pro cyclist, pro motocrosser, it doesn't matter what, and you watch these guys go race and they take their helmet off and they look as relaxed as you and I are right now, and yet you'll go out to the track tonight and you'll go ride and you can't get your helmet off quick enough, you can't get your jersey, and your tongue's hanging out. Yeah, maybe they're paid to train and all that goes with it, but if you were to train and all you had to do was literally wake up, cross-train, ride, sleep, eat, repeat, if it looks too good to be true, to Greg LeMond's point, it probably is.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. I don't know all the ins and outs, right? Like I don't want my own experiences with like a Caden, as far as trying to get to this level.
Yeah.
He is a freak athlete, so he can be that type that can go do a 35, take his helmet off, and talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
But you really look at him and you get to know him, and he's sweating sweating like you've never seen before. I mean, he's worked, right? And then second moto comes around and he's a little flatter, like 100%, right?
Yeah.
1 hour turnaround. So I know, he is that type of guy that has a crazy big aerobic engine, but even him, despite that aerobic engine, is not a spectacular, quote unquote, athlete at pro. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge wake up call to me when I start watching guys that were not spectacular amateur athletes as far as the fitness side goes, who were not freak human beings like Lance was when he was born that way. I mean, Lance would have kicked everybody's ass if you met him, if he was still natural. Like his heart, his VO2 max and all that stuff are better than most people,
mm-hmm.
or better than 99.9% of people. But when you see that and you go, oh man, there's something going on here without a doubt. Now, I don't want to intermix amateur parents into this too deep, because at the end of the day, I don't mean it's negative. If your kid can't go 12 minutes, we got a problem. You can definitely train yourself to be a 12-minute fitness kid.
100%. I've got triathletes that are 12, 13, 14 years old doing a 2-hour triathlon.
Right.
Swimming, biking, and running, a 1.5K swim, a 40K bike, and a 10K run. Roughly 2 hours, 15 down to 2 hours for some really elite guys. And that's, 13 to 15 years old.
Yeah.
So you're exactly right. The problem is you look at the amount of education in the physiological side in the endurance world. That's why you see kids 13, 14, 15 that can swim, a 1 minute 100. They can bike 40K mile. They can do 25 miles an hour, and they can run a 5:30 off the bike for 10K. It is physiologically possible,
but rare.
Well, the problem that we run into with our sport is the answer is stiffer suspension, faster motor, screw, fitness, until the fitness gets, unfortunately, the equipment will eventually level out.
100%.
Pro.
Yep.
And once the equipment levels out, then they go, oh, we're behind on the fitness side. Well, you can't make up time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So,
If you're, hopefully people watch this, but like if you're an amateur kid and you really are getting on the pro track and you're 14, 15, 16, which should be about where you need to be at, and you're not training towards 35s in your long-term goal, like if you literally have not put that on your radar yet and built your off-the-bike program to be building the volume of aerobic work to get to there, and then you're GoPro at 18, if you happen to do that, you will take, like the Anderson had to do, you cannot make up that aerobic base. Like, I don't know how to put this to parents. I don't know what age you can do it at. I'm older. But at some point, you better start building that aerobic engine early on, because it takes years of work to build that base. And that's why we see these older athletes kicking ass now. They've figured out enough recovery, maybe it's PEDs, whatever it is,
yep,
in the off season to get healthy enough where they're not dying, their joints aren't falling apart.
Yep.
And then they have, Tomac has an unbelievable aerobic base compared to probably what he had at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So
we refer to that
building that young,
yep,
you're going to improve.
Well, we just call it athletic maturity.
Right.
Every time you jump on the bicycle and you go do an hour, every time you jump on the motorcycle and you do a 30, every time you go to the gym and you lift a pound of weight, every time you get on a rower, whatever it may be, swim, bike, run, rower, mountain bike, gravel bike, I don't care what you're riding, you're building athletic maturity. Every workout is a building block. And the goal is that year over year over year. That's why, to your point earlier, it just guts me when you see these facilities. It's just sprint work, sprint work, sprint work, sprint work, sprint work. And then you wonder why a child 2 or 3 years into a program actually regresses, to your point earlier as
100%.
Well.
It's so frustrating. And I've seen it time and time again. I'm not going to name names on facilities. I'm not going to name, they're all the same to me. Like they really are.
Well, they're all run the same way.
I have an athlete now that we would refer to you, and I would hope that he would have done it. And I'm watching his spring national results right now. And so here's a kid that got top 20 at Loretta's, pretty much in a home training program, like just ride locally and some help from some people, but wasn't really a part of a facility that much. Fast forward, it's been about a year in a facility, and literally in the same class he top 20 at Loretta's at, I think was on like if they took 15 to the main, he was 15. And you're like, a year advanced, you're at a facility now, you had top 20 speed at Loretta's, you made Loretta's the year before, right? Like you are clearly the talented enough individual, and now you're at a facility and you can barely make the fast 40
at a spring national.
There's a serious, and it's not even as deep as Loretta's, right? They're not.
Right. Not at a spring national.
There's a serious problem here. And if you can't see that there's a serious, and the funny part is I already know what they're going to say. And so we do some motor stuff for them, and they've got, I think their factory connection on suspension. What I heard the other day is that they had purchased one of these, a championship kids takeoff A kit. They're searching through the motorcycle now as to what that answer is. But when you go look at the lap times and you're 10 seconds a lap off of first.
Yeah.
It's not the suspension. It's not the motor. There's a kid on an 85 turning a faster lap time than you. I don't care who built the thing. It's not 125 cc's. It's slower than your bike. You don't need more power. You don't need better suspension than what you had at Loretta's. You had enough to go faster. But the facility thing, it's not to knock facilities, right?
No, not at all.
I'm a believer that they could work, but it's your mental approach on how to attack that facility, how you train there, what you work on that will determine whether or not you're successful.
Well, at the end of the day, we have to remember who rides a motorcycle. And this is why our network of CRS facilities, that's why we reverse the model. We start from the physiological and we filter it down. So we're working with a riding coach to make sure that when the rider goes to work with the riding coach, they're not already a chewed up pile of mess. And unfortunately, without that kind of insight, your ability to recover, how many calories are you eating? What is your sweat rate? What's your replenishment rate? What does your meal plan look like? And it is not hard. It just takes a little bit of documentation, but because it's a new language, they go, oh, it's just too much.
And that's a problem, right? Yeah, it's the new language, right? And also it takes a little effort.
Yep.
And unfortunately,
but that's my job. But that's my job.
Right. I just mean go through the motions, wear the watch.
Yeah. Well, we interpret the data. We're an analytics company. So we're interpreting the data. We're trying to get you to understand physiological principles and then give you the Cliff Note version of what to do. But without being disrespectful, if we see your daily calorie burn rate's 5,000 and you're eating 3,000.
Right. You got a problem.
Well, my point is how sophisticated is that? You're burning 5.
Right.
You're eating 3. You're telling me you're tired and you can't keep muscle on and you're not sleeping well and your race results suck. You're burning 5, eating 3, where should we start?
We should definitely start there. I don't need to do any rocket science.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like literally just go to your grocery store and buy more food and make food a priority and eat it.
Yeah,
well, I'm too busy. I got to work on a bike. Well, why are you working on a bike? Well, you guys put 4.5
That is so frustrating,
bike.
right? When people put off things that will clearly make them good.
Well,
how do you put? Okay. How, for example, hey, we're kind of sick. Kid's not 100% healthy. He's not riding really well right now. Something's up with him. We haven't figured it out. But we're going to go race the spring nationals.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, we got to be there. We got to go. We got to do our thing. We got,
Yep.
Okay, but
what do you expect to get out of it?
Right. Like unless you're literally, okay, we've won everything this year and we think we can win and we're that type of athlete and we're that guy. Like right now, it's kind of Drew Adams seems like in the pro class. Seems like he can show up any day right now and he's the guy. Otherwise, but if he didn't show up because he's sick, the team doesn't care. Right? Like they know, okay, he's sick. He's really sick. This isn't worth it. That just blows my mind. Like when parents spend all this money on all these things, whatever it is, I mean, you name it, and they show up to the race and they spend all the travel and time off of work and money in the bike and all this stuff to show up, but they're not, something's unprepared, whatever it is.
Yep.
It could be the bike, it could be the suspension, it could be the motor, it could be the maintenance, it could be the fitness, it could be the kid, it could be all of those things. Why are you there? Like I hope our podcast, so we hope to bring on more individuals who've been there, done that. And I really actually, I'll probably talk to him about it. David Brazel, Caden's dad, is hilarious. He's a riot. I'd love to have him on as far as just some of their stories, which I think people would love. His stories are hilarious. And I literally died laughing when he talked about back in the day when he was on 50s. And there's probably no more fun time for a moto parent than 50s. There really isn't, because you don't know anything. And so you just come into it blind and you go racing. And so you're willing to do anything, right? And he goes, I forget what exact story, but I'd love him to tell it again, which was just along the lines of, oh man, created up some bikes, shipped them out to World Minis on a pallet. We flew out there, had to go, had to race. My kid's going to be the next national champion. We're going to get a factory ride. We had to go. And he's like, I look back now and I'm like, what in the hell was I thinking? You know what I mean? He's like, we didn't have to do any of that stuff,
Yep.
So funny that because once you climb that ladder and you really see how the politics work, which is what I want this show to bring about in the next is nobody gave two craps whether or not Caden Brazel's at World Minis on his Cobra 50.
That's a
dad and that fan. It's just so funny how that works. And that, we got other guys and the Deegans talked about that.
Yeah.
They asked Brian on the Gypsy, hey, is it important that you win all this stuff? And he goes, amateurs doesn't really matter, except does it give you the ride and the team you want? It's the only thing he said. And he's 100% right. They got out of amateurs what they really wanted, which was the pick of the litter on the pro teams.
Yep, exactly.
That's the only reason you do it, because all those titles and championships mean nothing once you.
Well, the Lawrence brothers, the Lawrence brothers exemplify that better than anybody. They didn't even grow up on the amateur scene here.
No.
And they're riding for one of the premier teams.
Right.
And look at what Dazzy said. If you do not make these pro sport classes 20 minutes, I'm taking jet back to Europe.
Yeah.
I'm done with this.
Yeah.
Because it's a waste of my time. And I think that just personifies everything we've talked about here today. Yeah. So,
all right. Well,
brothers, thank you so much. And go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll say if you guys have more questions what I would love for questions, and I'll try to sprinkle them into future episodes as Rob, is ask like a fitness question you don't know. Just put it in a comment and we'll try to filter through and throw those at Rob as to maybe not like, he's got to have to be general. It's not going to be to you, but like, hey, I'm really curious about this or that. Throw it in there, ask Rob a question. Or, to me, like we talked about setting expectations. So in your fitness journey, that's something that I'm glad we talked about here. There's a period of time you have to have. So don't just think I can just jump on the elliptical rower 2 weeks before my national and be fit. Right. But throw those questions at it, things I'd like to learn, I want to learn. And then on top of that, we're going to be eventually sharing some of my quote unquote fitness journey. I'm really going to struggle with this, Rob, because I have no goals as far as something to be good at. So I just need to get more fit, lose some weight. So that's my goal, right? Which I think is not going to be the end of the world, but I'm excited to do that. I've signed up for his online thing. And so I'm going to learn how that works. And I can share with you guys things that I think are neat and cool. And I'm excited. I bought this watch, which I just started wearing about a week ago. So I'm learning my numbers that I'm getting accustomed to. So
It's good stuff. Well, Derek, I can't thank you enough for your time. It's amazing. 2 hours goes by so quickly,
yeah.
man. And for those of you that are with us and maybe you're taking this in bite-sized more portions, thank you so much. And like Derek said, if you have questions, put them in put them down below in the comments, or if you're more comfortable DMing them, go ahead and do that as well. And our goal is to do this every couple of weeks. So keep your eyes out. We'll have episode number 3 here in a couple of weeks. If you have any questions before then, you know how to reach us. Thanks so much for your time. Be safe.